There we go. So I'm just checking here on the tablet that we're actually live. This will give me an idea of the delay as well. It's probably about 10, usually 10 to 20 seconds. I might need to caffeinate here as well. Yeah, so you can see I moved out to the living room area here from my little office space, which was my former bedroom. Yeah, there we are. Okay. Yeah, there's quite a delay. It's almost a minute. Damn. Okay, how's everybody doing? Yeah, I'm a little tired. I've been keeping the strangest hours, and now I've got melatonin. You know, I'm trying that stuff. It's magic. Oh, I also grabbed the. Wait, I gotta fix the title. It's too big. Um, Squish it down here. Make it the right size. Hey, there we are. Hey, it's Sunday Marlin Hangout 2023, baby. Can you believe it? It's the future. There you go. That'll be our thumbnail. Okay, let's get this going on. 2023. Code desk. Code. Oh, I gotta fix that too. Maybe this is better. Hey! Check it out. Yeah, I'm getting into stuff. I have a whole big pile of tabs, 6-minute tabs, and lots of things that are going on. You may have noticed we just put out, or I should say, I went crazy and put out a 2.1.2.1 update ahead of 2.1.3. And that was just because there's such an enormous pile of commits that have piled up lately. I figured it was time to put out some of those. They had a lot of nice little fixes, but there's maybe one or two things that are a little weird, which got in there that have since been fixed on the way to 2.1.3 in bug fix. So if you do encounter anything funky, you can switch over to bug fix, which is pretty stable actually. The stuff that hasn't gotten in there yet that's sort of still in the works is the fixed time motion system from Ulendo, which also includes advanced input shaping, which I think you'll like. That's pretty cool because you can turn that on and off at will and use the regular motion system and then switch over to fixed time. The issue that I have right now is that switching between them is kind of funky, and sometimes I think one of the issues was sensorless homing wasn't working with fixed time motion, but it does work as soon as you if you do a little move in Z and then do it, it works fine. So, one of those things. There's something in the state of the stepper drivers maybe that needs to be adjusted. Yeah, what else are we working on? LCD refactor stuff involving the Ender 5. Oh, this is a big one. Yeah, I'll talk about this a little bit. But I guess the main topic today, before I get into all this code stuff, was the state of open source 3D printing. Was an essay that was in the blog of Joe Prusa recently. And far be it for me to disagree much with Joe. He's got his own perspective on things and what's going on in the world of open source 3D printing, and how it's affecting his business. But I didn't get much from his article about details about what's going on with his business. What is, are cloners undercutting his sale of Prusas, or I mean, my view has always been that the point of open source is that you stick to it. It's a principle. And you just, if you're using open source software, you continue to honor that, and you put out your releases and make sure that you give people the sources when they want them. And it's fairly straightforward. There have been some kind of other issues that have come up because a user might want to, or I should say a company might want to make an open source 3D printer. Like the Ender 3 is actually an open source hardware association certified open source thing, and And I think that after they did that, they felt some pangs of regret. They were worried that, you know, all the cloners were going to undercut their business and sell cheaper versions, and that's always a possibility. But again, my view on things is that you follow you honor that stuff, you honor the open source license, and you put out your releases, and you basically build your business on quality and support. And, you know, as long as you put out high quality products and you don't, you know, gouge the market, which, you know, you kind of can't these days. Prusa's prices are what they are because they use high quality products and they put a lot of R&D in, and they spend you know, they actually put in the resources to get really qualified people, and they have, you know, they've got a fairly big business to run, and so it's you know, there comes with a certain cost, and, you know, with that comes really good support and, you know, all the other infrastructure that goes with it. A lot of companies are now trying to make it so that they have a, you know, they have a 3D model store or something that's connected to the printer that you can download models directly from the web and then print them. And I think among those sorts of efforts, Prusa's has actually been one of the best efforts in that area. And so, you know, in general, I think that the open source 3D printing situation is actually very healthy. It's very healthy. There's an awful lot of competition going on. There's, you know, definitely there's a commodity market where you have to deal with, you know, the prices that the Chinese can get, and they get a lot of free shipping allowances from various countries because they've got that historical free shipping privilege, and so they actually have the ability to have lower prices a lot of times just because of that. But, you know, in general, they also are very much closer to the source of where most things are made, and so if they need electronics, for example, they don't have to go to some other country and ship in a million things from different places to get parts. Everything is kind of in the local area, and they've done a really good job of consolidating that. Whereas, you know, other countries have they've got increased tax regulations, or they've got business costs that they have to consider. And in general, those extra costs are passed on to the customer. So you have what you have. But as long as you can produce a really good product and a high quality experience, and then do really good service, I think that keeps things, you know, healthy for the business side. As for the 3D, you know, open source 3D printing, like firmware and slicers and hardware even, you know, I mean, all of these things are really good right now. We've got Clipper is making huge strides and getting adopted by a lot of things. Marlin is continuing in its, you know, we're continuing to move forward, and we actually get a lot of submissions from people, from companies that have, you know, different machines and are using Marlin to run those machines. We're having an easier time of getting things from, like, Creality, for example, and others. And it may be tricky to integrate some of that code sometimes. That's not always the easiest thing. And that definitely presents some challenges in itself. But in general, you know, I feel like we've got a really healthy thing going on there. Oh, fine, we'll bring my face up. Why not? Boop. Here we are. I can hide the title. Boop. There. So yeah, and in general, I think we've got a really good situation right now. And of course, for us, the challenge is, you know, of course, we can't switch to Clipper. And I can't just switch to Clipper and go off and abandon Marlin. The fact is that Marlin exists and is still a very important part of the ecosystem. And so my job is to continue to modernize the code base, make it easier to integrate things, you know, fix up areas of the code that need fixing up and cleaning up and modernization. There's a lot of long tail to Marlin because of its original, its origins in Gerbil and Sprinter. It follows a certain paradigm and a certain way of doing things. And certain elements of that I want to keep going with. For example, the fact that it runs on a single board, and that you're building something that's very much optimized and tailored to that board. Like once you've set the pins for a particular function, those pins are locked in, and we can use fast I/O to get much better performance on like an AVR board. On the 32-bit boards, it's less important to have that, and we can actually make pins into variables, and I'm looking at having that as an option. And that kind of configurability will come. But in general, once you've built it, it's like tailored to that board and to that machine. And you can adjust things like steps per millimeter and so forth. If you're getting, your belts are stretchy or whatever, you can add features and remove them, and you need to do another build when you do that. But I've tried to make that process easier with auto build plugin, and that definitely has been helping. You don't have to do as much searching around to do a build. You just pull up the tool and do the build. And if you have an error, it usually, well, almost always tells you what you're supposed to change in order to fix that error in like a migration of the configurations or whatever. So yeah, we're basically continuing to modernize, and that's that's my job. I see that as being very much an important part of it. Marlin isn't going away. I can't just abandon it and wander away, because there's so much always coming in, and it always needs to be integrated, and the considerations need to be made in terms of how those things fit with the current code base, whether they whether they should be updated or wait for changes, underlying changes, before they're brought in. But yeah, and in general, I see like a really, really healthy ecosystem. There is a little bit of irony in some of Prusa's proclamations and concerns, in that they've taken, they started out with Marlin, and for the longest time have been, they stripped out everything they didn't need, and started to, change things more and more, and in a way, like, took a different route. They did the forking thing, which, and now they have Prusa firmware, which is still kind of its underpinnings are still in Marlin, but it's less and less, something that can just be integrated with Marlin. And over that time, they didn't really make any contributions to upstream Marlin, and so it's like, in a way, it's like it would have been cool if they had just kind of like worked with us and taken their modernizations and brought them to the upstream Marlin. But I think that like every company, like Creality and others, they sort of fear that competition. Like, they don't want everyone to have their firmware on their commodity machine. They don't want to just be able to download all this work that Prusa did and put it on your Creality Ender 3 or whatever, which I can understand. But at the same time, it's like in order for us to move forward, it's like, and keep up with the Joneses, it's like something like input shaping, for example. We've had it in Marlin now since 2.1.2, and before that with the bug fix version. And that's a really good version of input shaping. It's like really optimized, and it's just ZV, and it works in a particular way, and it has certain limitations. All of these input shaping algorithms that are coming in all use a lot of memory, for one thing. So it's like, yes, you can run it on an AVR, and it actually will work on an AVR, which is amazing, but you do have to have enough memory set aside to be able to run it on AVR. And so that's, that's one of those tricks. Let's see, I was going to actually add while I've got this open, I was going to set up my chat. So let me open that and put in the link that I grabbed. And we'll see if anybody's chatting yet. Oh, hey, there you are. It's been a minute. Evil Gremlin's here, Keith is here, of course, and Derek Cirillo's here. Nice to see you guys. Awesome to see you. Let's turn that, there we go. Yeah, as you can tell, I'm a little rusty here, but it's working all right. I've got my monitor in vertical orientation here, which is really fun. It's a curved monitor, so it actually has that kind of like, it's looming over me kind of feel. And then I've got my trusty ViewSonic from, like, I don't know, it's like a 10-year-old monitor, but it's still the best monitor I have. Its color reproduction is great. This one that I'm using in vertical orientation is like $180, and it's 30 inches wide, which is great. Or I should say tall today, diagonally. But yeah, it's serving well. It's serving well. I can actually that way I can keep OBS in front of me and Discord at the same time. And they're vertically oriented. I could throw OBS on the top, for example. There we go. And that works out better. And we'll put Discord at the bottom. Meanwhile, put GitHub Desktop has been really great in vertical orientation because I can see like so much code and all the changes are easy to compare. But I haven't really been using the editor in the big vertical orientation much. Because usually when I'm working on code, I'm like, I just want to focus on, this little area. But anyway, open source or not, that's the way to do code. So from Evil Gremlin, he says, I think current amount of new hardware and features becomes problematic and starts to really obstruct the ongoing work, polishing and scalability. Yeah, there's definitely aspects of that. Like, I think if we had more standard APIs, one of the things is like in any evolutionary system, you have this, you have this elaboration that goes on, like populations explode and then you have all these different variations. But then, some catastrophe happens, as it were, or the environment changes, and only the populations that have really become adaptable will make it through that bottleneck. And in a way, it's like that. We have that process. We have this elaboration where lots of new things come in, and then what I try to do is then find the commonalities between them and bring them together more. But yeah, it's tricky because you don't necessarily know what you're going to need until you see what people, some company needs for their display or whatever, and so we have to wait for them to come in, and then we go, oh, I see. Okay, there's a new DWin or a DGUS or HWin or whatever else type of display it is, and we now need to integrate all the pieces for that, and then we can work on an API for it. But yeah, in general, the hard part is actually finding the time to, put pull requests on hold or whatever for, or just keep it at a minimum, and then like really hunker down and focus on those refactors. Like lately, for example, one of the things I've been doing is trying to fix up and just go through end stops, for example, and just deal with that code and look at how it was originally fashioned and sort of try to consolidate it a bit. Like we had this whole thing where originally it was like if you had an end stop defined in the pins, that was enough to like make it active, and then it would become something that you could like get the status of. And it was sort of hanging out there, like if you wanted, you could have all these end stops that don't actually do anything, but you could still read their status. Or you could have extra end stops on a single axis or whatever, but we never had a lot of functions attached to those. And so it's like I'm trying to now focus on that and say, okay, now you don't need to have like, I'm using this port, or to not undefine a pin that defines an end stop, because the pin was the thing that determined whether the end stop was going to be compiled in and active. I wanted to make it more formal, like, okay, if you've defined that you're homing in this direction and you're using this type of of homing, like you don't have sensorless homing, for example, using an SPI, then you're going to need a pin for that. It might be a diag pin on your trinamic stepper, or it might be a switch that's attached to a leaf switch or whatever. And so you need some pin for that. If you're using SPI, you actually don't have a pin, but you still have a state. And so it's like these things weren't heavily formalized. And then if you do need more than one end stop on an axis, you should have like, well, you can only use one for homing, but you could have the other one used for emergency stop or whatever. And so I wanted to make that, or a safety end stop. It's like CNC systems often, they can get deflected very easily because you're, going through hard materials, and you might hit something in the material you weren't anticipating, like a knot in the wood or whatever, and suddenly your axis is all deflected, and if it goes off to do something, like it could cause some bad damage. So you want to have a little bit of safety there. So one extra safety thing is to have, a board if it hits one of these stops. But if it's not, if you only need one end stop on an axis, then, how do you get that other stop, and what do you do with it? How do you formally define it as something? And so I have, just this, I have a defined hanging out called safety stops, which is just currently set up that if it's on, then it will define all the end stops that are available will become active, and they can then, whether it's on the homing side of the axis or the other side of the axis, it'll still look at that and say, oh, we want to abort the print if that gets hit. So those can be more formalized. The thing with displays is much more complicated. That's one of the advantages I think Marlin has over something like Clipper, where we're directly interfaced with, say, an Ender 3v2 display, and so we have all the assets need to be on the motherboard that are sent to that display, or it needs to know about how to talk to that display and how to interface with that fancier UI that we actually have more control over. And so I think that there's certain things about that are great, but it would be nice to make. The thing is, like, for any given display, like say the Ender 3v2, it's a one-off, and then they move on, and then they do something new and maybe some new UI, and it's like, I want to, I try to build these things so that they're available. Like, we got Marlin UI in there now, and it's like I hoped or would hope that more companies will use that, but a lot of them just love to go it alone, and then we have the other issue where someone brings in a new display and then they scatter code all over Marlin that pertains to that display or to that device that's on their machine, but then they don't wrap it up in a feature name or anything. And so it's like, for us to integrate it, we actually have to figure out, well, we'll come up with a name for it, and then we'll wrap it, and then we'll figure out whether it fits with the API for other displays or whether it stands alone. And yeah, it gets kind of tricky to form those APIs and kind of define what they should be. And the other thing I want to work on is, like, I've been writing up a lot of notes about it. It's the settings and EEPROM storage, and formalizing that and making it so that it's much easier to migrate from one version to another without losing your settings. And so I have to, like, I was thinking of using an IFF style data structure for that rather than something like JSON, and then also using hashes instead of strings to save space and memory, because again, we're still targeting AVR, and I want to be able to have something that's structured, but then it doesn't have to have a million new strings added to Marlin, which can take up a lot of space. But you can still get the output of that and save it in a file, and then when you reload the next version, it can find all the settings that are still good and can still be used, because it'll have a hash of the name and the version, and it can compare that and say, oh, okay, well, this data is good. And then if some feature wants to be able to have migration in it, it can look for its older version and say, oh, well, in the older version, this field was not there, and this new version, it's changed or whatever. We're going from millimeters to inches or who knows what, but it can make that conversion in place. And so each feature can deal with its own settings. And then the EEPROM is just kind of, the settings code is just a wrapper for that. It asks each feature, hey, what are your settings? What's your ID? How long is the structure? And it can check each of those things, and then each feature can say, oh, this version is no longer relevant, or this is what needs to change. And so yeah, as you go from version to version, it won't say, oh, EEPROM changed, therefore you have to rewrite the whole thing. It'll say, I could read this, and I got the backlash settings, I got your old mesh, but this, this other new feature, it's changed, and I can modify that. Now you need to rewrite the settings, and it'll rewrite the settings, but it'll have everything preserved. So things like that, like, can be just need to be worked out. And then I need to spend the week or whatever it takes to get it in there and tested and so forth. Let me bring up on Discord world. We'll go to the old live stream channel. Do I want to try something out from new on Discord? No, not right now. There I am. So we have a live stream, and should I share my screen on the live stream too? Sure, why not? The wide one, not the tall one. And we'll go for, I think it's a 1080 screen. It might only be yeah, it's a 1080 screen. And we'll just put that up. There we go. So we're doubling down. We got Discord and YouTube at the same time. From Keith, our most active co-developer, a new display UI every week. Yeah, it's we don't want to have that all the time. Like, one of the things we're working on right now is the resistive touchscreen support. also known as RTS. And that's like all over the place. There are so many little variants of it. The Under 5 S1 has one, and now they've got a newer firmware that they just put out for the Under 5 S1, which probably modifies some of the things there. So I have to, after doing a bunch of work for that, I have to review and bring in those changes again and review it again. And it's like, I mean, I have a direct line with Creality through Discord, but there isn't a lot of like working on the nitty gritty stuff, and that it's tricky with the language barrier sometimes. But we all speak code, and I think that the more that I'm just really hoping that they'll take more from upstream Marlin and work more with what's being and bring more stuff to the upstream Marlin as pull requests. We almost in fact we do get pull requests from like MakerBase, we get pull requests from Big Tree Tech, but Creality never sends anything, Prusa never sends anything. Others who use Marlin typically don't. We've gotten a few things from, I want to say Tronxy, but that's probably wrong. Tronxy's been better, but it's still, we did work with G-Tech a little bit, say on the mixing stuff for the A10 and A20 M machines, but that was really short-lived. And they were kind of, a lot of times they're looking for publicity as well, as they're sort of like, they see Marlin as, or me, because I might do a live stream or whatever, as being part of their publicity, their marketing arm, as opposed to being the technical side. And it's like, that becomes a little frustrating. It's like I get more interaction on and questions about, can you promote this or promote that, instead of talking to me about, getting things into upstream Marlin and then getting things sorted out and working with them to fix certain things. Like on the Ender 5S1, for example, they've got a touchscreen which has its own UI, but you can't navigate subfolders. In fact, if you see a subfolder, it just looks like a file, and it'll try to print the folder as if it was a file, which of course doesn't work. And so I don't know, they may have fixed that by now. I don't know. I'll have to get their newer firmware and see. But yeah, things like that, it's like, I really want to work more closely. And it was a little easier when Naomi was around, because she would actually bring stuff like for example, the belt printer, the CR30, which is over here, got really, that was some good collaboration, because we went back and forth, and we're like, how can we make this better and that better, and what do we do about printing multiple objects? And that was where M808 came in. I was like, well, we need a means to be able to print something 100 times and not have like a file that's like, the same thing 100 times. So it's like we needed a way to be able to tell the SD card to go back to this point and continue from this point, and then do it 10 times or whatever, and then stop after that, or just do it forever until the filament runs out or whatever. And you could even do that. You could say M808 forever, and it'll just keep going, and then when it gets to a place where the filament runs out, it'll tell you, hey, change the filament. You change the filament, and it'll keep going. Get to the end of that roll, stop, time to keep going, and then it'll keep going forever. So yeah, you can basically run your CR30 forever. But yeah, things like that were starting to happen. I was really feeling optimistic, but then Naomi moved on to greener pastures. I guess she felt the quality control or other things at Creality weren't going so well. At least that's the word on the street. That might just be, face saving on her part. I don't know. Maybe they just didn't see the advantage of having Naomi around and decided to let her go. I don't know. But either way, I miss having her around and having her as a liaison for that stuff, because her English is pretty impeccable, and she was in the end, fairly easy to work with, despite her occasional rants online about certain things. She's very amenable and fairly easy to work with, so I kind of miss her there. What else is going on? Just starting to look at from Scott Bader, is that right? Just starting to look at the whole config INI stuff. Yeah, that's an interesting area. I wanted to use those now for like our continuous integration tests, our CI testing, because like the old school way is a little bit messy, and these are a little more readable, and also the diffs. If you do a diff between like one test and another, it's like it's not pretty. Whereas if you do diffs between like config ini files, it should be much easier to follow. The thing is, the more ini files we have to do, and as I change feature names or add features or whatever, they could become messier or harder to, it's more things to maintain, but we're already maintaining all the tests, and so it's like, it'd be good to maybe use that. But yeah, if you're not familiar with that, the config ini stuff it's used by, since Platform IO uses ini files for its own configuration and for your build settings and so forth. For each board, we have a little blob of code in these ini files that tells it like, these are the build flags, and this is, the STM32 variant, and these are the parts, the libraries you need to download, and all that stuff is all nicely specified in these little chunks. So it already digests ini files and has all the libraries or Python modules that are needed to load those are already there, and so it's like, it was just a natural fit to say, oh well, during the build we'll just have our script, which another thing that your ini files have is you specify the scripts that you want to run for each build, and so we just added a script for every build that checks for an ini file, and if it's there, it applies what's in it before it does the build, which can modify your config or whatever. And it can even do things like download an example, then apply these changes, and you can specify, you can have like 6 different things in there and it only applies like one of those chunks, or you can say, oh, apply this chunk and that chunk. And it's going to make things more flexible. But yeah, it's just starting out, and it's going to be a question of how flexible that can be overall. But yeah, I'm digging that. It'd be neat to then take it and make it like, some of the settings in an ini file could be applied for like build time settings. But we'd want to probably do something where, well, again, it's easiest to do hashes. Like, you just have a 32-bit hash for each string that you might need inside your ini file, rather than having to reproduce every single setting name inside of Marlin, which can take up a lot of space. We just have a hash for each one, which is like 4 bytes for each unique setting, and then we would be able to apply those. So that's something to look at for the future. But yeah, it would be fairly straightforward. Like, you just have throw the ini file on your SD card or whatever, and then we would run it, kind of like we already do with the EEPROM stuff, and it would just apply at the same time as EEPROM. We also have auto 0, auto 0, auto 1, auto 2.g, or G code, and those files are meant to run when you first boot up, and those can apply things or do things. But that facility is not used a lot, and then we have also the idea of like macros that you could run, which is sort of borrowing from RepRap firmware. But then, formalizing that is tricky, because it's like, over time it'll be like, well, I want to be able to do like everything that RepRap firmware does, where I can actually create a homing routine where it sets centerless homing on an axis, tells it to, go that way until it hits the edge, and then automatically set the home position, and have that all be G-codable rather than have it be hard-coded as procedures in the firmware. There are elements of that I like, and then there are elements of that are like, it's just like, because it's generalized, it can make the firmware, it could make parts of the firmware smaller, and then everything is sort of offloaded to these macro files. But, for other situations, you might want to have everything be, there and available without your SD card. So, things like tool change procedures or whatever. So yeah, there's some question as to like doing that for the future. But yeah, those are all things to explore. My focus lately has definitely been on going to the underpinnings and the older code, and looking at, all that legacy cruft, and trying to clean it up and make it so it's more tailored to the way we do things now, rather than the way we may have anticipated doing things in the past, or the way that Gerbil or Sprinter might have approached it in the past, and really look at our realistic situations. So making the end stop configuration easier was one thing. Making settings so that they're more persistable and versionable, and that they have a structure to them so that it can be more easily verified. And if parts of your EEPROM are obsolete. You only skip those obsolete parts, but all the rest are still there and can be used. That's, you know, there's using an IFF style format is the easiest way to go about that. I figure rather than having 4-byte letter chunks, though, we'll have it be a hash based on a longer string, so you can have, you know, a long name and a version, and it'll hash that, and that'll be a unique 32-bit value. And then if there's ever some kind of overlap, we can catch that and just say, oh, well, maybe you want to change the name. But I doubt there will be. You know, if you do the hash right, it shouldn't have any overlaps. There are good string hashing functions that are like, you know, MD5 or whatever, that can produce a nice unique 32-bit value, although those are usually much longer, those hashes. But if we can get it down to something which produces a unique 32-bit value, that's the way to go. And then basically it's just a matter of having it be unique within Marlin. It's like if we only have, you know, 100 different features and each of those has a unique string in it, then we can probably come up with a hashing function that deals with those 100 strings and makes something unique out of them that fits in 32 bits, I think. So yeah, there are all kinds of things to explore there. Who else is up? Let's see, it's good to see you, Scott. You know, for homemade variations, after a total rework, initial ANET machine, any comments on the config INI process? Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing, like, how do you use it? Well, one of the good things about INI is that it can make migration easier, because we do have the ability to like export your INI, your config as an INI, and then reapply that INI on a new config. And then so you'd get most of your settings, and only the ones that maybe change names would not, you know, would get missed. But you could just fix that in your INI file and then rerun it, and rather than having to go and scan through the two config files. And then the INI file is really meant to also consolidate, like, rather than containing everything, it just contains your customizations. And then you'll just, apart from your customizations, you'll use the standard settings. And so the idea there is, yeah, have a shorter file that just pertains to what you care about, where you don't have to like deal with looking at necessarily the whole giant config file and searching through it. But it can be useful to like read through the config files as well, and like each of the features that you're using, just to see if something new has been added, or if there's some new option that would help improve your experience, or if there's a new menu item added that goes with that feature or something like that. It's kind of useful to look at. The best way I've found is like, you know, I just do migration using GitHub Desktop. I'll just compare two versions of Marlin together. So like, yeah, I've got Code Desk, there. Yeah, so I'll use like GitHub Desktop, and I'll just, you know, pull in my old configs and my new ones, and I'll bring in the changes from, I'll just drop like the latest default configs on there, and then there'll be a bunch of chunks that I need to add, and so I can just add them. There are other, and people use other diff tools to do that sort of thing. Generally speaking, we don't change the configs too much, but there'll be things added and changed here and there. And then if you just grab your old config and change the version on it and try to use it to do a build, if there's anything that the name has changed, you'll definitely get an alert about that, and it'll tell you that you need to change the name. Or if the way that the function or the option works changes, it'll check the value and say, oh, you know, this used to be in the range of 0 to 10, now you use a value from 0 to 1, or whatever. So we try to put out good, helpful error messages about that stuff. So yeah, I haven't really learned Git to that level. Yeah, that's the thing, is like, the thing about GitHub Desktop is it's really meant to kind of hide the Git from you as much as possible. So, well, we kind of like, I've done demos of this before, but I'll just do a quick thing. Like, say I've got Marlin, and I've got my old, I keep my configs around. So here's like BQBX, which I named Rover. And here's my old config. So I keep my configuration, and I just keep it as a branch. And maybe I upload it to GitHub, which I don't have this one uploaded, so I probably should. Let's publish it. Boop. There, now it's published. Hopefully in the right place. Origin as opposed to upstream. And then I'll, you know, double check that here by using Boop, good old terminal. So you can see I'm on my rover branch, and I can say git status, you know, that tells you it's up to date with origin. Yes, that tells me that everything is good. So I know where it is. It's on my origin, which is ThinkyHead user on GitHub. And so it's there, and so now if I go to my other laptop, I can pull it down and hook up the printer and flash it with that. Now let's say I want to bring this up to date with 2121, because it's well, it's probably from bug fix. So let's say I do want to bring it up to date with the latest bug fix. I just would say git rebase bug fix, you know, dash 21x, and maybe maybe I'm not sure I brought it down yet, so I can say upstream / bug fix, and it'll just get the latest one I fetched anyway, even if I haven't necessarily updated my local copy of bug fix. And now it'll say, oh, you've got conflicts, so then I have to run over to here, where, you know, which is my editor with Marlin in it, and I'll just search for these things, and then it'll search. Oh wait, is this it? It's got to be. Oh wait, it's just searching tests. There we go. So there, now it shows me that there's some changes in the config, and you can see here, oops. So this up here, you can see this is from my configuration, is in this little block here, and this is the way that the config is now. And so I can go, well, I didn't have auto-tune turned on, but I did have edit menu turned on, so I'll just turn that on up here. I did have auto-tune menu turned on, so I'll turn that on here. And then probably doing this for testing. The thing that changed is Bang Max was what I was using before. Maybe I still want to use Bang Max, but I'm just going to use 255, because why not? And then my heater power used to be 50, so I'll just change that, and then I'm done with this blob. Now, if one of these settings moved to a whole different place, I could look for it, and I could change it where it is now. And now I'll go and search for some more of these, and then the next one is here. PID temp bed is turned on in my config, but apparently I moved it, so now I'll go searching for it. There's where it is now. Now I'll go back to this little block up here and say, okay, so this is the new config. And then I also have bed limit switching turned off, and that's also moved, so it's still turned off, so I'll just leave it alone. And then I remove this blob. There. Next. So yeah, it's a little bit tedious to do this part, but at least it gives you a way to directly compare. Now I can say, okay, here's the way I had my Z2 set up on the BQ. I have current home is based on, used to be Z2 current, which is Z current, and so all that is still consistent if I keep the new settings. And then microsteps, same thing, and then ZR sense is what I'm using, and so everything is the same, so I'll just keep the stuff from the new config, and then I'm done. And then so I can go back to GitHub desktop, and it'll say continue rebase, and if there's any more commits, which I think I only had one, then it'll ask me about those. And there, now I'm all set. I'm now up to date with bug fix, and I can force push that to GitHub, and now I'm ready. I can pull it down on my other machine, and I'm all up to date. So it was a little bit of work to do the conflict resolution in the editor, but there's actually little some of these Git tools, like there's one called Git Kraken, and that one actually, you know, shows you a diff, and it has like a little thing in the middle, a little bar in the middle, a little island, and you can hit the left arrow to bring the changes that way, or right arrow to bring the changes that way. That isn't always exactly what you need. Like, as you could see, I had like, oh, my config changes were here. I don't necessarily want to keep this block or keep that block. I want to make the changes that were in this block and then apply them to the new block. And so that was kind of, you know, you do have to do things manually sometimes. Now, if I was using the config INI instead here, then I would have done, like, I could go back to my old config and my old version of Marlin that I had there and do a build where it exports a config INI of my settings, and I could stick that in there, and then I could bring this up to date with or without my configs. I could just grab like the latest bug fix, for example, copy my INI in there, run a build which will apply the settings to my configs, and then at that point I have updated configs. Potentially everything is there, but then again, you know, I would look at it and go, well, it has, for example, in that case we had the max bed thing, where it was 255 in one, but max bed in the other. And yeah, like max bed power. Under here, MPC max used to be bang max, which, you know, which is just like 255 or whatever. It's sort of like your highest power. So here I just wanted it to be 255, whereas if I'd used that INI method, it would have brought over bang max, which may or may not be what I wanted. So I'd still have to look at it and compare and make sure that it's what I want. But overall, it would bring over all the settings that it could. And then if some setting name changed, it might, I don't know if I have it in there where it alerts you to that, but you could, you know, check your build and, you know, again, do the comparison and see if anything got missed from one to the other. Just using, you know, this Git view where it shows you the differences. And so here you can see what I've got now is, because I'm using GitHub Desktop, and the way I've done it is, I just put my configurations in here. What it's showing me is just the differences between the default config and my config. And so it's easier for me to see at a glance, like just the things that I changed in my config, which is a lot of things. You know, don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of changes for any given config. Or if I wanted to, I could instead of having this 8 hour ago pull request and then my configs, I could have, say, version 2121, and then I could bring in the example config for the BQBX and throw that in there, and then I could throw my, and then do a commit of that, and then I could throw my configs in there, and totally replacing the, you know, the base configs for that machine, and then do another commit of that, and then I would have just the differences between my config and the example config, and I could look at all, you know, I could look at both of those commits and see, oh, this is what's different between the default, and then this is what's different between the base config and my config. I customized the baud rate, or I customized my PID, which usually you will do. You'll have your PID be different. So yeah, it's just a nice tool to have it, and, you know, for any given change, you can, you know, add a new commit, or you can merge them together and just keep the things you want to compare. So, you know, to give you an example of that, like let's say I'll go to configurations, and I could even do it backwards, which is kind of cool. Like say I want to just know the differences between mine and the base BQBX. I could go and here's BQBX, so I'll just go and open that in the Finder. Boop, there it is. And I'll just copy these files, and I'll stick them on right on top of my Marlin files. Replace, replace. And now when I go to here, I can see if I was going to revert to the base config, these would be the differences, like all, and clearly I'm out of date. Like this is based on 21x or whatever, so I would want to make sure I'm using a comparable version. So instead of release 2121, I would use branch import. Since I'm basing my stuff on bug fix, I would use import. And import 21x, or I might even use bug fix 21x, which is the generated version of import, basically. And so I could go back and say, okay, well, let's go back to configs. Here's the BQBX settings. Boom, go back to Marlin, replace them. And then when we go back to GitHub Desktop and look at my Marlin branch, now we're looking at a smaller set of changes. And so here's the stuff that I've changed versus the import stuff. And there's certain things in the import that are like not in the bug fix yet, but are pending. Disk.io host drive. So for example, that's a new thing that's coming later. So I look at this and I go, oh, okay, this is the differences between the example and mine, and I didn't really do much. In fact, I haven't even changed the PID yet. So it's like, you know, there's nothing really to compare here. But at least I can see, oh, well, one thing that's changed is soon there's a new baby step global Z thing coming, and when that gets merged, I'm going to be doing these changes. Or you can see Z2 rsense is based on Z rsense. That's one of the changes that is in the example config, has this, whereas the my config has Z rsense. And so I might change this. In fact, I might want to go back and fix the imports and change that to Z rsense, since that's, I think, the default value. Yeah, it's basically 0.15. So I've just discovered a minor glitch in that particular, or maybe several configs, just noticing. So yeah, I could go and, you know, change that. So yeah, this is just one tool that you could use. There are lots of different ways to diff things, of course. Uh, I just use this because I have it open all day. I'm doing, pull requests and stuff. So it's like GitHub Desktop is just a convenient tool for being able to compare things. And I've gone over it a million times in these streams, but it's handy. It's handy. Um, and if you prefer Git Kraken, I know a lot of people like that tool. Um, it's got some nice extra features that make it easier to compare stuff. And if you keep a history, like, if you decide, I want to keep my old versions around, you can do that, and it makes it easier to kind of like revert back to older versions of Marlin if you find that the newer one is, taking up too much space, or it has, stuff in it that's weird, or it doesn't give the behaviors you want. Yeah. So this is, I didn't get too deep into Git stuff, but thanks. I'm glad it helps. It's just, more about like more about compare diff stuff as opposed to Git stuff. I'm partial to Git, but as a tool for maintaining your versions and stuff, it can't really be beat. I used to use like Subversion and CVS, but Git has really proved itself to be the best, which makes sense, since it's made by Linus himself, or Linus Torvalds, my Finnish bro from another Mo. Any other comments? With 2 years, I'd say diff will obstruct you more than help. Doing it with Git should be easier. Yeah, I mean, depending on the number of diffs, it can be quite daunting to go through. And like when you see when you go and you try to do a merge and there's 100 of those conflicts, it can be really annoying. You don't want to have to deal with them. You're much better off like using something like config ini to do an export of config ini. And in case people are tuning in for that info, since we did bring it up, the way that config ini export works is you go to, right now, configuration ADV, and near the top there's config export, and you can just turn this on. And so when you do a build, because it's number 2, it'll export a config ini. And I may make it so it's like 1, 2, 4, 8, and like you can add them together and get multiple exports, but right now I just have it export one thing at a time. And then I have these other things, which is JSON and YML, which is just kind of for my own use right now, which hopefully goes towards, like the YML is going to go towards documentation, for example. Although the structure I've come up with for settings documentation is probably superseded and much further along than what's exported by this. But yeah, if you just want to config ini, like now I'll do a build. Let's go to, just to get one for those. So I want to config ini for my BQBX. So let's do a build using auto build. Oops. Let's see, am I in the right folder? We'll open up Marlin. Boom. And there it is. And I'll just do a build. And this will take a minute, hopefully less than a minute. It's downloading some stuff from Keith, which hopefully will make it upstream to Arduino Core STM32 eventually. I don't know if we still need it. We'll have to look into that. I hope we can get as much stuff out of the original, platform files and Arduino files as possible without having to have our custom forks. But with BQBX, it had some other thing. A lot of these machines are a little weird. Like they'll use a GD32, although this one doesn't, but or something like that, and then it has different timings or who knows what. But this is one where we needed a workaround of some kind. We'll probably want to document that more too, like inside the ini file, we can stick a note in there as to why that's being used as opposed to the regular Arduino, and then we could check on that periodically and see if it's still relevant, like at release time, for example. We can just check and see if it's still relevant. But definitely a good idea to keep notes on that rather than just sticking it in there and forgetting why we did. Yeah, we had to backport a fix to an old. Yeah, it's like this is a case where we had to use an older version of Arduino, but we needed something that was in a newer version. of Arduino STM32, and so we had to bring it over. But we couldn't use the newer one because of reasons. And one of the things is like the structure of variants has changed now with the latest versions. And so, okay, so my build is done. So now I can click this to reveal it in the Finder, and it'll bring up a window, and you'll see the config INI is right there. So let's take this config INI and we'll drop it into our Marlin firmware folder, or I guess it goes in here. And we'll replace the config INI. And now when I go over here to my config, you can see, okay, here's all the differences. Well, differences don't matter as much as what's in there, but you can see it captured all my settings. That all the enabled ones, basically. Not just the diffs, but like everything that's enabled is in here. Things that are disabled are not necessarily in here. I don't know if I've got any things that say off. Like as I scroll down, I'm looking for ones that say off, but let's do it over here. So here's the config INI. Do I have any that say equals off? Nope. So yeah, if there's something that is in the default that needs to be turned off, I didn't capture that, so I'll have to do that kind of thing. But this is meant to be, capture the differences, and you can see that it breaks it up into two things. It says one config section is the basic, and so that's configuration.h, and config advanced comes from the configuration adv.h file. And so it captured them all, and then at the top it says config base, and this is where you set things like, what do I want to download? What is the config version? In this case, it's 2.13. And then I want to apply all these, and these are all the things that are on. And so they're alphabetical, so it's like it's not grouping them together in a way that is nice and neat with like your regular config. And also, this is generally not meant to be human readable as it is meant to be machine readable and usable. And so, it captures everything. And so if I do run this if I were to put default configs in and then run the build, it'll take the config INI and apply it to my default configs. And so this is essentially equivalent to having, your own customized configs, but you can start from any default, and it should apply everything here, even on the latest version, and you'll be good to go, presumably. If some things change names, it may stick in the old names. I'm trying to remember, I guess it probably does. It'll stick them at the end. And then when you do the build, it'll give you warnings and say, hey, this name changed. And so you can go into the INI file and change it, revert the configs, use the INI file again, and do the build, and presumably each thing will work. So some of the things that are little bits, minor weaknesses in this, like I've got Y2 stall sensitivity equals capital Y stall sensitivity. Rather than capturing the value of Y stall sensitivity, it relies on the other setting being in here, and which is 90. This one has 92, so that's good. But yeah, you can see that the way that it's grouped alphabetically, it means that, it would be better for us to do a lot more alphabetizing type naming, where things are going to be grouped, putting prefixes on things, but that means longer names, which I always resist a little bit, making really long names. But the things that start with default, are all here. And there's so many things that could be, everything in here is essentially a default. If it can be configured at runtime, it's a default. Otherwise, it's a fixed value. But yeah, and so here's the preheat stuff. And so in here, it becomes, straightforward to add things. But if you wanted to add a whole group of settings and they're alphabetized here, but then there's a piece that's down here that goes with it, it's like you have to remember to find them. So it's not necessarily the best tool, the best file to be maintaining things. But if you really do feel like organizing it, you could go through and organize it and add comments. I may actually, in the long run, break this down by sections and add that as an option or something. So each section or each group of settings could be grouped together rather than being alphabetical. But the way that config INI export currently works, it's using, as I recall, it's using standard library stuff for INIs, and so it does kind of end up being alphabetical whether you want it to be or not. So I'll figure out ways in the long run over time to make this better. But right now it's experimental and it's meant to be played around with, and you can see how this would be like something that's like, if you have to have this big long file for every time you want to do a, say a CI test, it would be annoying. What you really want is to be able to say at the top, oh yeah, use config, and up here you could say, you know, example /biqu/bx, and then you could apply just the differences here. That would be, you know, it would be nice to be able to consolidate that. So it's like making more tools that do this kind of thing, which can just give you the differences between the example you downloaded and the other stuff might be useful. But of course, you know, from version to version, things here may change, and so it's like these won't necessarily apply. So it's, yeah, it's like it's trying to organize so many cats and herd them all together. There's just so much going on with any given config and the way that they're evolving over time, that it can be hard to manage this stuff. But this at least brings us closer to having a migration option. I mean, making a tool that does migration means, you know, having a constant sort of database of every change from version to version. It's doable, and but it's again, it's a big bunch of work, and then we have to decide, you know, what solution are we going to use in the background. We're going to have like, are we going to use something like OpenSCAD, not OpenSCAD, but like OpenSQL or something, EasySQL or something like that in the background. It can be tricky. And then, you know, we're obviously we're not going to use spreadsheets. You know, we'd use something like a database. But there are different forms of databases that have existed over time. INI files are just kind of clean. That's one of the reasons I've favored them, and they're also, of course, again, they're what Platform IO uses, and so everything's already there in place for them. Now, if you wanted to export the JSON, you can change this to 3, and then run that build again and export a JSON. But that's another thing that's like, that has to be digested by some script. Maybe it's JavaScript, maybe it's Python, but it needs to be, you know, it's machine digestible, but not necessarily very human readable. And the idea of the YML is it captures, like, it's meant to capture like a whole bunch of the structure, and I've gotten pretty close to having something useful there, but making it actually turn out documentation, for example, hasn't really worked out yet. So here we are, and done. So when we go and look at the JSON file that it just spit out, let's see what that looks like. Oof. Yeah, so here's, you know, the name, and then it even has everything. It's like, what section is it in? Here's the name again. It's because we're using it as a key, but then we're also using it as a field. And then, is it enabled? What line is it on? You know, what's its sequence ID? So it's on line 66, but it's actually the 4th setting. And then this is the 5th setting. And so these should all be, I think, in order by sequence ID, basically. 318, yeah, so they're in order by sequence ID. So this actually captures the structure of the config file itself. And then it even has like the comment on the thing, and then the options that go with the thing. And so, like, you know, this could all be, this could be generated and then used to create an interface, is kind of the idea. It could generate a bunch of form fields for you, and just using this, although, you know, how you organize those form fields and what type of data can be entered in those form fields becomes trickier. Here we have config H version, but you can see it's actually capturing the full comment from the top. So it's like, that comment doesn't necessarily pertain to this thing, but it's in there anyway. The author, you know, here it is with escaped quotes and everything. So yeah, this is like maybe useful for something. That's why it's there. It's there for some usage, you know, that you may have, and it may end up. And then also the requires. I capture all the requires. So if you look at some of these requires fields, they can be pretty complex. So that requires that. That requires not. If motherboard's not defined, then you get motherboard. If polar graph is defined, you get all these other things. Here we have iDriver type needs to be defined. I'm trying to look for one of the more complicated ones, because we actually capture things like else and all that. So it's like, it'll have either, yeah, here's one where it needs to be, either parking extruder or magnetic parking extruder. Oh, and enabled parking extruder. So you can see this is redundant. It's like all it really needs is this last piece, but because it's in a block that's in a block, it gets both and mashes them together. And, you know, so it's actually capturing all that stuff, which is pretty neat. And then it can even do stuff like put parentheses around things that need those extra parentheses. So here's one where if you have any of these, but it's basically just this. It's just switching tool head. It doesn't need the rest of this stuff. So yeah, there's kind of a neat structure here. So while I'm here doing live stream, I guess I should bring up what's going on that's new. I started to make a place for config settings to get documented in a structured way. And you can see that's using YML. But it's not using the stuff from, like if I do an export of YML, we might as well go back and do that. Since we're looking at these, let's turn this on, let's make this 4. And we'll export a YML file, which means doing another full build. But it's not going to export it exactly in this form. But what I've been doing is just like taking the options and formalize and putting them into structures so that when this documentation is spit out, it looks like, let's see, have I got anything open? No. So we'll go to marlinfw.org and we go to help settings. So right now we've only got these 5 things in there so far. And oh, I thought I made this neater. I may not have published it yet, but quickly go to documentation and make sure deploy has what is in master. Let's see, documentation. Let's git rebase upstream deploy. Oops, I might want to just reset it to what's in deploy. Neaten options layout. Yeah, so deploy should have that. And yeah, I don't need that yet. But yeah, it's got everything that's, it's already got that. So maybe, let's see, padding, display, width. Yeah, so I made these inline blocks at 45%, so it's supposed to look better. I'll try doing a hard reload and see if it works. No, I feel like it didn't get deployed properly. Let's try doing a force push. And make it, what I can do is I can amend this commit, which will give it a new ID. And then when I force push it, it should do a new deploy. But anyway, the general idea is these are going to lay out like a couple columns rather than being all laid out like this. But so you go to extruders and it'll lay out like this. And it's not the most readable thing, but hopefully I'll be able to come up with some nicer layout that makes it more human readable. But the general idea is you can at least go down and say, okay, for switching tool head, here are all the settings, and then it has documentation, and then if you want to edit that, we go to extruder, we go to switching tool head, there it is, and say I want to change this, I can just do that. But tool heads are locked with a servo. What does that mean? Maybe I want to say picked up and dropped using a servo mechanism or something. So now I've done that, and I can just do a preview of it locally, which makes it easier to see the changes as they're done. And I would work on I would do these changes on the master branch, typically, so that they're all picked up by everybody. And is it loaded yet? It'll load in a second, any second now. It has to rebuild, generate the full site, basically. although it's supposed to just generate the changes, but we'll get there. There we go. So there's my local copy, boom, settings. Yeah, see I laid them out in 2 columns, so that should be, that's how it should look on the current online version, but yeah, all the basics. So what's your hardware? You need a motherboard, serial port, and so little by little I'm moving the documentation from this giant page that has everything, which does lay out pretty nicely and has some, you can more easily see what the actual config looks like and it has images and stuff. But I wanted to formalize it in a way that's more searchable and brings you to a smaller page with just the options that you want to look at. And so eventually things like images and stuff will get incorporated here, and it'll lay them out in a standardized way. But that's where I'm working. That's what I'm working on now. And if anybody wants to jump into this and help fill this out, and basically copying the text for long from the, and brief. These are all coming from the config files. But as you can see, I just generated a YML file, and you can see it's totally not the same. It's a giant YML file that has like all the options in it, but it's keyed by the name of the option and so on. So I'd rather, and it's not compatible with Jekyll. So if I wanted to do a Jekyll version of it, I'd have to modify some things. But in general, at least it's valid YML. So we've got that going for it. Comment, quote. It's like a multi-line thing with a quote at the beginning and the end. Presumably that all works. It's digestible, but I couldn't just drop this into the site and have it turn up, show up as documentation right now. But it's the kind of thing that could be digestible by Jekyll once it's, expanded upon. But in general, like, with Jekyll you have, each of these would have its own little, like, it would have to have its own little line in front of it, and then this would be like name instead, rather than being, currently it's under, keys, and in order to look this up in Jekyll, you wouldn't really be able to. I think the way it works is because it's using keyed arrays, you can't like get the key of the array as you're going through, the way Jekyll works. But you can see like in order to do a layout, you have to go through this rigmarole of, this is the way I've ended up doing it. And when you have sub options, I actually have it go through and reopen setting info itself, so it's recursive. It opens this, does a layout of the thing, and then checks to see if there are sub options on the option, and then if there are sub options on the sub options. So it allows you to have an arbitrary amount of nesting, basically, is the idea here. And then the top checks to see, am I the top level item yet, or am I something that's a sub option, and how do I deal with each of these? So your layouts are HTML with a lot of Jekyll sort of stuck in the middle. But it works. You end up with a nice, at least the starting layout is not too bad. So over time I'll get this more filled out and it'll have more images and stuff. The other thing I wanted to keep was like, what version did it first appear in? And that makes it so that then you could filter and say, I only want to see the ones that pertain to, version 1 to, 108 or something, and that's, or 2.0 but not 2.1.2, and it'll hide all the options that don't exist in 2.1.2. And then I can also do things like, the other thing here is I wanted to be able to say, well, this option was renamed, and so I want to be able to say, well, you want to be able to search the old name and find the new name. And so the other idea is that, if I'm looking for switching, previously it was kind of hard to find, but now we have, well, I'm still not finding it, but it finds the G code, it finds the features, it finds that, but I can start adding these things to, I can start adding these to the search index. Right now I don't think I'm indexing the settings yet fully, but maybe, I don't know, switching nozzle, like if I go searching for switching nozzle, do I find it? Maybe not. Yeah, it's still on the configuring Marlin page, but it's not finding it in the other one. So yeah, I gotta start to digest that into the, I think it's because it's digesting the page content, but it's not necessarily digesting the all that structured YML stuff. but it'll get there. It'll get there. So, yeah, in general, things are going pretty well with the project. I've been slowly patching up long-standing weird things, trying to standardize more, and in general, just trying to make the whole code base still remain viable and move forward as much as possible, while also preparing the documentation in a somewhat more modernized form, so YML. Right now, the big upcoming features, let's get into that a little bit, on Marlin include, and I'll put these away. I don't need these reversions here. So yeah, base BQ. That's my BQBX config. Yeah, that's the one I like. So going back to Marlin, right now I've got fixed time motion, so that's coming up. And right now we do have a fixed time motion in bug fix, but it's not very complete. It only does XYZ axes, not delta, and not, extra axes and stuff. So I needed to start to bring in support for those extra axes and stuff. So right now this is a little outdated, so I've got to bring in the latest version. Git reset hardhead upstream. Oh, it'll be easier if I know the name. Upstream, and I'll just put this in. Boom. There. So this should have now. There we go. This is the latest from, it's Origin, of course. I only have this in my fork right now. There we go. So there we go. So right now, the fixed time motion updates are pretty well consolidated. We've got some things are changing, like just the name of that, and a lot of the stuff that I started working on in this ended up being integrated already as like piecemeal, little bit-by-bit changes, like using new structures for bit fields for data and stuff. So this axis bits was recently added, so it was easier to refer to things without using test. Test this bit with an AND, or XOR or whatever. So little things are happening here, but one of the main ones is like this big old, like here's how it's just fixed time motion only does X, Y, Z, and E. It's all very formal, so I wanted to fix that up, and like now we have, instead of Y, X, D, Y, D, Z, D, E, D, now we have traj instead. And that's trajectory, because that's what it was named. That was what the documentation said it was. So. And then same here, start position is now all the axes, which is X, Y, Z, E, pos actually includes I, J, K, U, V, W. So it's a structure that has all the axes in it. May end up changing the names of those someday, but right now it's it makes a certain sense. And then the shaping is actually a structure which contains like the shaping data. And so yeah, just changing the data and making it more consistent. The other thing that was in here which prompted a big change in Marlin was the direction bits they use were like 1 for forward and 0 for reverse, whereas Marlin was using 1 for reverse and 0 for forward. And I was like, well, I could either change fixed time motion to use our standard, or I could look at our standard and see if it makes more sense to follow theirs. And in fact, because we're using high for forward and low for reverse as like the standard for non-reverse directions, I was like, well, I guess theirs makes more sense. We'll use 1 for forward and 0 for reverse. So I went through and changed our direction bits to completely the opposite of what they were, which ended up making this a little bit easier to deal with. So this is coming up, and this actually includes various new options for input shaping. I made a menu for this, so you can actually turn it on and off and edit the stuff in the menu. And I could show you that in the simulator, I guess. But yeah, basically anything that's got fixed time motion turned on could work. Let's see, let's try use example configs simulator. So let's grab the simulator config. And you can see I can build my Mac OS version of the simulator. And I could turn on FT motion in the configs. FT motion down here. And we'll just turn that on, and I'll turn on the menu, which is called FT motion menu. And this has a lot of settings, but basically the other thing I changed was it used to be enabled by default, and I was like, I should make it disabled by default. So that's now disabled by default, mainly because it, again, that like the stall guard wasn't working great for sensorless homing, and there were some other things. So just keep it disabled until people want to use it. Plus it's, you know, experimental, so it just makes more sense. So now I can build the simulator, and hopefully I'm using a version that's all good, and it'll be happy. And this can take a minute. Grab image UI, which is the user interface library, and implot, implot, which goes with that, and VCD writer, which I guess is interesting. I don't know what that is. But building the simulator. And the other thing was FT motion. Using the simulator, I found a couple bugs. It's complaining about sprintf. Oop, LZD pins enabled. Yeah, I already fixed this in the simulator, but it hasn't been apparently merged yet. So let me see. I gotta grab I think I was using a thing called main plus. Let me check my simulator, hold on. I have my own copy of the sim UI here, so I have a branch and it's called main dash plus. Yeah, so let's just change the config to use main dash plus. Let's see, where's that? It's under P3P, hold on. Yeah, so we'll just switch that up to thinky head, and we'll change this to, and we don't need refs heads, we can get rid of that soon. And mine's called main dash plus, and we'll try the build again. Hopefully it grabs the new one. If it doesn't, I can fix it up. Yeah, there it is, Marlin Sim UI main plus. So yeah, I've got some fixes already in there. And it should be better now, but change one thing in the configs and it has to rebuild the whole thing, so we'll wait. Boom, ready to go. Or is it? What now? Oh, is duplicate symbols? Oh, I don't know what this is. Darn it. M43. I guess I can turn off M43 if that's a problem. It's called pins debugging. Let's see if that fixes it at all. I just have to get pins debugging working better for the native HAL, and we'll be in better shape. Let's see. Let's change this. Discord, where'd you go? There you are. There we are. Okay. Hey, it actually built. So now I can run my simulator. So quickly over here. So I can test all kinds of stuff, but here's our display. Boop. Pop it out. And we'll just go to motion. Oops. Motion. Fixed time motion. There we go. So now we've got all these options. On, ZV, ZVD, EI, 2HEI, 3HEI, MZV. Well, I don't know why this is performing so badly. So yeah, if I turn on ZV shaping, it's similar to the current ZV shaping. Now I have some frequencies I can set, and this has a dynamic frequency mode, so I can turn that on, Z-based or mass-based. So I could say Z-based if I prefer. And I don't know why I didn't put off in here. Oh, it's already off, that's why. So yeah, if I go here, it'll say, now you have two options, off or mass-based. I don't put the one that's enabled in here because I didn't. So yeah, I can turn that off. But yeah, that'll change the frequency by some small number, you know, so you can do this. Change it by 0.04 for every millimeter of Z or whatever. And it'll actually adjust the frequency by that amount. So yeah, and then you have linear advance. Actually, there's a separate linear advance built into FT motion, so this is actually separate. So this is just turned on and off the usual way with a single click. And then you have an advanced K value you can set for that. So yeah, so basically that's the new menu. And it just allows you to change fixed time motion stuff. So that could be handy. You might find that useful. Yeah, the performance on this is sucky. I know we can do better. But yeah, so you've got, I can have it on or off and do things and do my testing right in here, which is kind of fun. So I got my ZV motion turned on, and I can try doing like a G28 and see if it completely fails. But it should all work. Yeah, see, it's doing that, but it's up, homing failed, printer halted. Yeah, so there's some things wrong. So clearly, you know, this is a great place to debug. I can actually see what's going on with the internal state and use the debugger on this. And if you've never used the simulator before, oops, can I just close it? It should just close eventually. I wonder if there's a reset printer option in here somewhere. But yeah, it's so tightly integrated with Marlin that it's like, it makes it part of the actual simulator itself. Damn. Not responding. Force quit. Can it force quit? Sometimes you can't even force quit things. Oh, there we go. So yeah, if I wanted to debug this, there's actually an easy way to do that, which is to use in here you say launch sim LLDB, and it'll launch it inside the debugger. And so I can actually, oops, I gotta authorize that, and then boom, now it's running in the actual debugger. And so if I want to pause Marlin and like do things, I can do that. I can go to Marlin core and go to loop or idle. Let's go to idle down here. And here's, well, here's loop, and I'll just stick a breakpoint here. And boom, now it's broke. Now it's in the debugger. Exception has occurred. Oops. Somewhere in here, SDL swap window. Apparently it didn't like something. Maybe it's because the debugger and GL is running, but you know, it's built on a big old stack of OpenGL and other stuff. So I'm not surprised if it has some issues. But in general, at least you can get there. You can start running in the debugger and debug certain areas of the code. And let me see if I've actually got the simulator in a visible state. No, it seems to be dead now. It's gone. But yeah, we're getting there. It builds, it runs, you know, gives you a starting point for being able to debug and stuff. So yeah, I can kind of give you a little insight into like some of the new features if there were a lot, but there's not a lot. Mostly this past cleanup since 2.1.2 has really been about stabilization, standardization, kind of like, you know, fixing up some of the legacy stuff and other things like that. So what's going on in the chat? Yeah, CI work. Um, the ROI for a complete database, yeah, it doesn't, it's true. A database is like, it's nice to be able to use it for things like searching and comparison, but it's like all the data inside of our configs is like unique. And the thing that is kind of nice is like if we wanted to have it digest like all the configurations from version to version and then compare them, that would be maybe something that it could do. But and then provide like some guidance for building a migration tool. Some of the stuff that's been changed is like I split up the sanity check into 2 files. The first part is called, let's see, I go to inc changes.h, and it basically is like all the changes are here now instead of being part of sanity check. And so this file contains all the errors that come up if you're using some old option that the name has changed or something else has changed about it. So it can catch that kind of stuff. And then the sanity check is still huge and ugly, but at least it's it's only 4,000 lines now instead of almost 5. So, but all the changes are here, which is nice, and this can be skipped if you don't care about changes. So certain things are happening there. That's cool. But yeah, there's not a lot to go over in the 2.1.2.1 update. The 2.1.3 update with stuff coming up is pretty cool. We've got, let's see, going back to Marlin. Well, there's, of course, fixed time motion, which is fun. I'll just discard this for now. Might make my own simulator pile later. But yeah, some of the stuff that's hanging out and waiting is, of course, the migrating LCD pins is another big one, which I think I'm pretty excited about. This is taking all the LCDs, and instead of having each pins file define the LCD pins for that particular pins file, it defines what the expansion ports are, or it gives you an adapter and says, well, okay, I don't have EXP ports, but if you buy this adapter, then you can then connect all the displays that usually use EXP ports. And so you just have to define one adapter, and then you have the ability to use all the displays instead of having to have each pins file define every bloody display that it would use. This is obviously something that should have been done way early on, but so you can see it like for INZ Retro, you've got EXP1, EXP2, and I named the singular one EXP3. So if it's got your standard EXP1 and 2 ports, those will be those two, and then EXP3 will be the other one. But you can also say, well, there's a board that only has an EXP3 port, but we still define it as EXP1. And then in that case, it's an EXP3 to 1 adapter kind of a concept. But the idea is that, you define them, and then right now it's like, my first thing is, as I began this, I would just create as many of these EXPs as I could. And so in some cases, the expansion ports are not standard like expansion ports. Like the AXT X5 Mini has this a different concept or whatever. So it's like, well, I'll just define this differently. But then you create adapters, and so here's what an adapter looks like. So, for example, LCD on EXP3, it defines a 1-to-1. LCD 101 is EXP301. LCD 102 is EXP302, etc. Pretty simple. And then, if you do one for an adapter called Melzi Creality, so Creality is these Melzi type boards, which aren't really Melzi because Melzi is a big long board that's ugly, but it has, it has certain pins on it or whatever. So it's like for each of these boards, you have an LCD1 that connects to EXP1, LCD2, but you can see that 6 and 7 are swapped because one uses CSA0, the other one uses A0CS or whatever. And so, each of these is an adapter. And then you might have a pin 27 board or something like that, and that has a different adapter. So yeah, the idea was to build up this library of adapters, and then when you want to connect a display to the board, all you have to do is have the right adapter. And some boards, have a standard adapter. And so it falls back, if nothing else is defined, then it falls back to, and like the last one is EXP3, what is it called? EXP1 on 3 or something like that. But yeah, there's the TH3D dual adapter, which connects a dual adapter to a single port, and then maybe connects other pins elsewhere. But yeah, and I'm very carefully, I'm providing a link, I'm giving a careful description of the adapter, and I'm providing, the adapter for every display. And then when you go to have a, say, CR10 stock display, for every board that I had it, hard coded in there for what it was going to be, like here's where it was hard coded, that's taken out. Boop, no more defined here. Now it's defined in a single file called LCD CRT and stock display, and it just has how does it connect to the adapter. And then I also laid out what all the flags are that Marlin defines for this particular display, so that I had that someplace. So it's sort of also building up documentation for each and every display. And so little by little, I'm putting this together. And so far I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 8 different display options. And so eventually I'll have all the displays migrated to their own files. And then you'll be able to connect any display to any board as long as you have an adapter. So that's the idea here. So this is something that should have been done early on, but better now than never. Better late than never, as it were. So this is coming together pretty well, but it's like, I don't want to commit it yet until I've built up a bigger library of displays and kind of like done as much as I can for as many pins files as I can. And also sorted out some questions that I still have, which when I come up with a question, I also stick that in as a comment. Like, oh, I might need to remember to do this, so I'll stick a comment in and with a big question mark on it saying, what do I do? And here's a case where this board defines EXP3 header, which is, a single header for a typical CR10 stock display, for example. And then it just has an adapter called LCD on EXP3. And so it maps LCD1 to EXP3, and then it becomes the adapter that you connect to. And so when you connect to the board, it has everything set up for any display that you might have. And then if you needed a 2-to-1 adapter for this board, like you could actually define, oh, I have this 2-to-1 adapter, and I just plug it into EXP3, and then the pins get broken out in this order. And so that should be done pretty well in the near future. So this is a big one. This is one that I'm very excited about, but it is also like, it's that kind of like grunt work that nobody wants to do, but it really needs to be done. So, this isn't something that requires, huge amounts of coding skill per se. It just requires organizational skill and being able to like keep everything straight as it's being built, and then having a sort of a plan, some kind of action plan. And so, yeah, my action plan has been to just do one display at a time and get them as sorted out as possible. And then we'll continue to build on this. But there's so many pins files that it's like, I have to go through each one and see which displays it has, whether they've defined EXP headers or not, what the EXP headers would be if they were defined, get them in there and defined. So that's this first part, is this begin LCD pins migration. As you can see, I've only done 38 files, and we've got a lot of pins files. So it's like, fortunately, most of them, I don't know if it's most, but a lot of them have their EXP headers already defined, and so just having the adapter is all you need to do, and then you can do that. So you can see also I've got like weird adapters like adapter mini panel dual, map old style mini panel connectors to LCD 1.2, contrast with single to mini and dual to mini adapters if such adapters exist for mini panel. So yeah, you have some boards just have this, wide open header that has 20 pins on it. So I needed to define what those were and how they map to, EXP. And so in this case, EXP 1.6 or LCD 1.1, 2. So this is a typical adapter, is one that maps to a dual adapter, LCD 1 and LCD 2. And then I named it Mini 15. So like if you had a mini panel type board that has this adapter on it, then those pins would be defined as Mini 1 through Mini 20. or Mini 01 through Mini 20. So, and then I, put a little comment on them as to like what these actually typically connect to, although beep could be LCD 07 instead, or Dogem 07 or whatever that pin is, which is like the selector pin typically, or CS pin. So yeah, like I'm slowly getting a handle on what each of these things is used for and how they're mapping. Like here's a case where you might be using this with a character display, or you might be using it with a graphical display, and you have the standard ST9720 display. And like, I know that with something like Clipper, you just say, oh, I'm using an ST7920 and you're good to go. And then it knows what to do, as long as it's connected in a standard way. But the thing about its handling of ST7920 is it uses the lightweight display and has like, it gets all its menus, which is kind of cool. It gets its display through the firmware from the Raspberry Pi and then passes it through to this ST7920. But building on that, it's like it's not going to have like a mesh map or whatever right on your graphical display, whereas with Marlin you can have that. So so at least by building this up, I'll have a much more standardized set. And the cool thing is when you add a new board to Marlin, you won't have to define its LCD pins. You just define the EXP pins, standard, whatever they happen to be, and then every display is now available for that board. So that's been a big step. So I started with the ones that were easiest, like the Ender 2 stock display. There's only this many files that I really had to deal with for Ender 2 stock display, so that was kind of cool. There weren't that many. And then MKS Mini 12864, which is also a mini panel. Like these are kind of similar to each other. Also, they kind of all have a family. Ender 2 stock display is MKS Mini 12864 is mini panel. And so I wanted to kind of gather these together. But they're not necessarily, so it's like, they have different adapters. Or look, the mini panel, for example, is a good example of one that on the mini panel side, it's not an EXP12. It's got its own pins layout. And so you have to have an adapter of some kind for it. But there is a standard adapter you can get. And so I wanted to like define that. And so here's like, each one gets an entry in that pins LCD. So little by little, these are getting ported over. And so I can always use more help with this particular PR as we go. Like what I'll probably do is merge it in a fairly complete form. But I don't have a way to test everything. So, once it's in there, it's going to be, some things are going to break and I'm going to need help with those broken things. But then the idea will be, hopefully people will jump on board and want to port over more displays from more boards and get this sorted out more. So it's like having it in an incomplete state and having it merged will be better than trying to like get it complete and never merging it. So, this is coming together pretty well though. I'm really proud of what's been done in here so far, but it really has been just like, I asked the question, okay, how would I deal with this if I need to? So like the Mega Controller, for example, it has this LCD connector on it. How do I deal with that? Well, I'm going to have to define it as some kind of standard, because it apparently follows some kind of standard layout, get everything defined in the pins file as to what the pins are that it expects you to be using, what those connect to on the board, and then provide an adapter for that. And so, I started out with like, well, I'll just define it and then I'll define the how this works within its own context first. And then afterward, I'll figure out, okay, for the mini panel, how does that actually fit in with the Mega Controller? I can move them. It's got now, instead of having this, I have an adapter, and I just say, use adapter mini panel dual in this case, and then that goes through the adapter instead. It does mean, another layer and more pin names and whatever, but having it, go from defining the adapter on the board side to the adapter on the LCD side was, it's a big step and it needed to be done. So so far I'm pretty proud of where this has gone, and little by little it's coming together. Also, Ender 2 stock display and MKS Mini both define mini panel. So I have to probably come up with ways of distinguishing between a real mini panel and these other displays, but adapters is a good way to go. The tricky one is going to be all the ones that pretend to be full graphic smart controllers but aren't necessarily full graphic smart controllers. Assuming they all have standard pin layouts, it should work out okay. But bit by bit, it's coming together. I'm taking, as I go through this and update it, I'm taking new adapters and throwing them onto this commit, force pushing everything. As I add a new display, or a new board with a mini panel, I throw that in here with this commit, boom, squash it together and force push that. So the final version will be it'll be neatly laid out like this, and all these commits will be, I'm not going to mash them all together, I don't think, when I do the final merge. I'll keep them separate so it'll be easier to at least go back through the history and see, oh, okay, this is what was assumed at that time about just the adapters, or this is what was assumed about CR10 stock display. But you can see I went through 53 files so far with CR10 stock display, only 5 for the ANET full graphics LCD, and then Ender 2 stock display is another one that's going to be popular, easy to move over. But you can see I also have things like, did they use Force Soft SPI? Some of them do, some of them don't. And then, I was also trying to figure out, is there some obvious thing I can look at, like which pin is used, and say, well, that needs soft SPI, obviously. And there actually is a way to kind of determine that. It's like, well, if it's on the SPI pins, but it's not one that's one of the standard board SPIs, like SPI 1 or SPI 2, it's using some other pins. Well, clearly that's software SPI, because you can't just use the hardware SPI in that case. So yeah, there's ways I can check that, but for now, I'm just sort of keeping these flags around so that it's more clear from board to board what they originally had and what their original intent was. So getting there slowly. But you can see I'm also putting on here migrated. You've been migrated. You've been migrated. Keeping notes within the actual commits themselves is just seems the best way to keep this organized. So it's coming together. So that's pretty exciting. What else is on the horizon? Well, here's one where fall back to SPI 0 with a YHCB. Oh, yeah, that's just a simple fix for something. Let's see, missing translation script. It's going to be improved. I was checking to see if const float t was useful. The advice in the early times was just, since floats are 4 bytes and pointers on AVR are only 2 bytes, it's quicker to pass the pointer than it is to pass the float or use a reference. But in either case, you're going to have to dereference at some point, and get those 4 bytes. So is it better to put it on the stack and then pull it off the stack, or better to pass the pointer and then pull it from the pointer? It can make the calls smaller, so it was really a matter of making the code smaller, but it's not by that much. And then I found as I went and made everything const float t that it didn't necessarily make things smaller. So it's like, Then we have SDFD multi-volume support. This is kind of a big one where instead of defining SD support, you would define instead volume 0, volume 1, volume 2, and you'd say, oh, volume 0 is the onboard SD card, volume 1 is LCD, and I might rename that to something like external. Volume 2 is going to be the USB flash drive, but some kind of standard where you could just define as many media volumes as you have, and then they'll automatically give you the option to switch between them. You'll have G codes that mount the right one, and so forth. And then also kind of building a little bit of a DOS kind of thing inside of Marlin, which I don't necessarily want to do a DOS, but M20 gives you a listing, for example, and you should be able to say, oh, I want to switch volumes, so you have M21. Say, I want M21U for the USB, or M21O for the onboard, which is, sometimes SDIO. And then there was the question of the original submission that I kind of started to riff on, that this is based on, was kind of looking at SDIO as a thing, as its own separate thing. I was like, well, if we just say onboard, it's going to be, if the board uses SDIO, it's going to be SDIO. If it doesn't, it's going to be SPI, most likely. There may be other standards that come along, so it's like I just want to be able to adapt to those as they come along. And then lots of things in Marlin then change, like instead of SD card connection cannot be LCD, it'll say volume 0 cannot be LCD or whatever. And then you have a default volume, so you might be, maybe when you boot up you want it to automatically mount the one on the LCD, or if there's nothing in the LCD then you want it to mount the onboard one. And so kind of reworking how it deals with volumes is the next thing. And so instead of SD connection is on board, any volume is on board would become a thing instead. And so this is another big refactor that I'm working on, but it's still in the works and it's not finished yet, but it's coming together. But the general idea was also, you could say, I want to definitely say volume, we wouldn't want to assume that you're definitely using the onboard as 0 and the external as 1 and the flash drive as 2. Maybe you want flash drive to be 0 and the LCD to be 1, and totally reverse it. So that was one thing I wanted to make it possible to do, which would make something called default volume somewhat obsolete. Drive 0 would just be default, and it would, but you could maybe change that using an EEPROM save value. You could say, have it store the last volume you selected in as the current volume, and then when you reboot, it'll have that be the current volume. So, but yeah, this is a big rework that's happening. So that's going to be fun. Not sure why it's not showing the current status, but happens sometimes. Let's see what else. There was also some concern about like moving on to newer tool chains, and it's like we definitely need to be able to certify tool chains and say this one works, that one doesn't work, this one has bugs, so that we're building with reliable tools and against libraries that we know have good working code and good working mappings of pins and are correctly assigned based on their bootloader and stuff. What else have we got? CNC abort on end-stop hit, that's an option again to, instead of just having it abort when you're running off SD card, you could have it abort a host job or CNC style job. Of course, the Ender 5S1 has been in the pile for a while, and the thing that's blocking this is just that RTS screen and standardizing the weird changes throughout Marlin. So one of the things I'm looking at is there's a lot of places where we have a blob of code that says, oh, if it's the EXT UI, then do this. If it's a Pro UI, then do that. If it's DWin, then do that. If it's RTS, then do that. And so I want to like make an API where it's like, well, it'll just call the standard thing, and whatever display you have, you implement it for that display. So here's an example. E3v2 basic calls homing start, EXTUI calls homing start. If it's a RTS, it sets home flag true. It's like RTS is not EXTUI, so it should be, because we have an API for that already. So if we made all of these use EXTUI, we could probably, build on that. But again, that's another bunch of work, and a lot of these have been, again, it's that ad hoc addition where we get elaboration and lots of elaboration, but then later on we have to consolidate and figure out how they all fit together. So this is a case where command pause was needed for RTS, but nothing else does this in M0M1. Can RTS use this separately in a different way? Like, I guess it just needs to show a thing or whatever. But again, if this was EXTUI, we could just have it do that one thing for EXTUI, and the displays that implement it would get it, and the ones that wouldn't, and that didn't care would just not get anything happen. So yeah, that's kind of the thing, is I just want to continue to build on these standards, and you can kind of see with each problem that we encounter, it's like, Crowdy RTS is scattering stuff all over the place. Like, here's a case where it's like in M104 it has it set a flag. Like, come on, guys. And that's this particular RTS, but maybe it doesn't pertain to RTS for another printer, like say the Soval SV06 also has an RTS resistive touchscreen, but it is not necessarily the same resistive touchscreen, and it has different, and it has different software on it, and so it wants different messages and different statuses and stuff. But yeah, this whole thing is like, there's so much stuff that they modified. Home axis BL, like they had their own custom home axis handling for BL Touch. I'm like, surely we can use the standard stuff and then figure out how to make it adapt to the RTS rather than create a whole separate homing. And so that's holding this stuff back. It's like, I do think it's good that we have, in the state of open source, as it were, that the whole idea of Marlin is, yeah, you can grab Marlin, customize it for your printer, and then put it out there and say, here, download our firmware. But getting stuff upstream is kind of part of that whole goal too. And I think that very few vendors are really thinking about, let's get these changes upstream so that when Marlin updates to 2.7 or 2.3.0 or 3.7 or whatever it happens to be in the future, they don't have to create a whole new firmware, or they don't have to tell their users, oh yeah, you're still on Marlin 2.09, sorry, and if you want the latest one, we don't have that option for you. And if we did want to have that option, we'd have to hire someone, but this is a 5-year-old printer, we're not going to hire someone to do a new version of the firmware. So you're stuck with 2.09. Like, that's kind of where vendors are at. They're sticking you with some old version of Marlin. And yeah, it saves vendors a lot of hassle if they would just work with us and think about bringing the changes for their machine into the mainline Marlin, wrapping them up in some standard, and working with us to develop those standards so that in the future, when they want to use Marlin 3.0, they don't have to hire someone for a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever it takes them to bring over all the changes. They'll just simply be able to turn on the switch that says, oh yeah, Creality Ender 22, boom, good to go. And it's just there, it's already there. So yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff in here. Like, they did this whole thing where they added mesh correction based on some averaging algorithm that they came up with, and I'm like, oh, okay, is that a feature that you think would be good for the world to have, or as a standard part of bed leveling? Is that from a plugin that you got that idea? Where did it come from? Help us guide that. And so each of these changes throughout the code, like as you can see, I'm looking at 28 changed files. I have to think about and work out ways that these can fit with Marlin without having to have them be stuck in like as they are, like next to every D1 E3 V2. Now we got Creality RTS. Like, we should have a single call here that says, calls the API for the displays that want to respond to this event. Now, of course, we could have something like a broadcaster listener type system, which is a standard kind of thing you see in a lot of model view controller C++ style programs. But broadcaster listener requires RAM and buffers and callbacks and stuff that doesn't necessarily play nice with AVR, and so making it a standard thing is like, I wouldn't say it wouldn't play nice, but it just uses more memory and uses more space and becomes more, the more you generalize things, the more that you're going to be using memory and slowing things down. So it's like, we'd rather have APIs that are kind of like, if you implement it, you get the call. If you don't implement it, it calls, it just does nothing. Or, and then the compiler compiles it out because it's a call to do nothing, so we just can compile it out, and, the code ends up being nice and small. It only compiles in what you need. And so as I look at this, I'm like, well, I want to make some standard thing where it calls an event handler for this event. And so each and every time that something new gets added, like here, this brings up a pop-up, I need to decide, okay, how am I going to handle that? Here for RTS, they actually do a thing called RTS error, and they pass error 9 for the bed and error 6 for the hot end. But it's not really an error, it's just a pop-up that shows the status. And so having this be like, I wouldn't necessarily make an event called, well, on error, on a heater error, because this isn't even, well, it is a malfunction actually in this particular case, so there you go. But in the case of this particular type of malfunction, in the thermal variance monitor, you would have, some handler for that. So we're going to build on that. And then you can see here, it's like, oops, there's a break that I guess was missing. So this actually is fixing a bug that's existing. So I'll take part of this and bring it in early. But yeah, these are all like, it might be just part of the added code, I'm not sure. But yeah, this is the stuff they added, a whole new RTS file. And then the thing is, like, some of these displays, like what's on the display, like for DWin, they actually run a tool that generates C++, and then that becomes the code that runs the display. And it's like when they go to regenerate, like they go and change a few assets on the display, they generate whole new C++ code, and that whole blob becomes what they add in. Like, that kind of breaks our ability to standardize, because now you've got all these functions that have new names, and you've got all these IDs that have changed, and like we can't use the old IDs, we can't use the old headers. We don't necessarily want to maintain 7 different versions of your display code inside of Marlin. So, how can we work out these standards and, ways of doing that? It's like, sometimes I figure it's better to just let them have their separate fork, let them fall behind, rather than try to shunt it all into Marlin. But I would love to have, be able to use the latest bug fix on the Ender 5S1. It's just that in order to do so, I have to bring in all these changes, and then some of them might be, breaking from day to day because of little changes in the display code or in the way that Marlin is doing certain things. And it's like, I want to change, and if I want to change, the way G29 behaves or whatever, like, or refactor it in some way, it's like all this stuff has to be rethought at that time. And it's like, how do we work that out? So bit by bit, it's like, it whittles away at our ability to move forward. And then, like, the fact that they throw this in our lap, and like, it kind of ends up falling to me mostly, because we don't have a pile of experts. Everybody who contributes to Marlin does it in their spare time just for fun. So, it's like, and I can't, at this time, I certainly, with my limited donations, like, I'm basically just meeting expenses. I can't afford to hire help. So it's like, until I move to a place where, like, I'm getting free rent or something, then I can hire some help. I don't know. Maybe I'll do that. Find a makerspace that has like an attic loft or something, and move in there and be in makerspace heaven for the rest of my life. But yeah, the rest of my Marlin life anyway. What else is going on? Could discuss that stuff all day. But yeah, just building on standards is tricky. I thought these were already, oh yeah, these are just proposed. We just did some nice fix-ups to probing, which hopefully keep things a little more standard as far as when the probe raises and lowers and how it behaves when you deploy and stuff. G30 in particular, I fixed that up really nicely. So G30 is much better in the upcoming 213. It's going to do all the right things. Like, it'll probe a point and then it'll move the nozzle back over that point. So everything is consistent, which is going to be nice. Oh, you're welcome, Scott. It's my life. I do it for the fun. I get up every morning. I know exactly what I'm going to be working on. So here's some stuff for auto power control updates for the laser and spindle. I think auto power in general should kind of like already be doing this, but I can see why you'd want to do that. And while we're here, we'll just clean up this little bit. And he already wraps things for you, so you don't need to wrap any. And as usual, somebody's using Vim. I have a plugin turned on so that I know I can easily see trailing spaces that offend me. So let's fix that. Yep, there's one in pins. But yeah, I'll push that. Clean up for you. And let's see, what else have we got? Take your time, GitHub. GitHub's been kind of slow lately. I don't know if you've noticed, or maybe it's just my network. What else is going on? Support for SPI TFT displays on touchscreens. This is kind of like coming up. This is from JMZ52. He's been very prolific in this kind of stuff. And Keith has contributed here too, which is great. But yeah, we're and this is a case where, again, this is going to end up in my LCD refactor. So this is another bit of mess that I'm going to have to clean up and work into my refactor. The TFT stuff in particular is like, right now it's not really standardized because there's so many TFTs that use a ribbon cable or whatever, and it's like don't necessarily connect to EXP12. But then there are some that have like Marlin mode. You can hold down the encoder if it has an encoder and switch to Marlin mode, which is cool. And then those will typically use EXP12 or something that maps to EXP12. So yeah, we'll work out how these go. But this will be changed to an adapter instead of having these be directly connected to here. I'll have some kind of TFT adapter or a standard adapter, and then we'll have this will all be inside of the SPI TFT file or whatever, the MKS TS35 v2.0 file. So that not every pin file that wants to support that display will need this block. It will be one block in one file. So that'll be cool. But yeah, I was tweaking some formatting, but I think this is about ready, probably. I don't think we can do much more with this than has been done, so I can probably merge that. Oh, do want to clean that up though, if I didn't already. Just make sure that there's not, I don't like too much spaces, man. And we'll just do that. Make sure there's no trailing spaces. And a little quick cleanup of your trailing spaces. Boop. Yeah, I call them Vim droppings. Oh yeah, that's true. Any should probably be either for that macro. Yeah, we've got a point there. And there's some ProUI errors. Our ProUI guy has kind of disappeared. He's focused on his for-profit enterprise around ProUI. for the fames. For the fames. Something called Use UBL Viewer. That's an interesting one. Just take a quick look at all the changes here. Okay. Yeah, I think he's got his own under ProUI. And then that and that and that. Okay, that looks good to me. I'll just mark it as LCD. Fix a bug. And squash and merge. And I'll stick an icon on there. Let's see, how about a Band-Aid, because it's a simple fix for a non-critical issue. Squash and merge. There you go. One down, 60 to go. Add support for SOVOL. So this I asked for a pull request and we got it for the SOVOL SV06 touchscreen, again, the RTS thing. Basically, I wanted this in so that I could start to clean it up. But it's going to also probably be hanging around for a while because it needs some issue. It's got some issues. Meanwhile, this is one of mine. It appears to have a bad initialization and hacks DIO pins To reassign its SPI port, this removes the use of DIO and fast IO and directly assigns the display pins. So as far as I know, this is all good. We had this concept of DIO pins which could be overridden in pins files, but then I was like, why? Why would we do that? Because you don't want to have DIO 52 not be pin 52. It just doesn't make any sense. So for now, that's my very rough beginning. So let's call this a developer-oriented kind of patch, even though it's LCD. I put the little developer icon on things that seem to be code related, and like more about how you would approach the code as opposed to whatever. So that's cool. So yeah, so you can see here if I go to this Soval SV06 RTS, why I wanted it brought over. Someone showed me a code snippet. The contributor showed me the code snippet, and I was like, well, clearly there's some formatting issues here that I need to fix up, because we don't do this. Our ifs always have a space after them, and something like this is like, you know, I would neaten this up a little bit, just like following my usual standards. I would say mode flag and just do that instead. And then maybe I would, because this is a single line, I might do something like this. Boom. And you can see how this in the middle of M600, suddenly we have this little RTS screen thing. It's like, this should be standardized. You know, what is this about? Send the data that's exchange based. And then the other thing I was doing was refactoring RTS in general. So this would be now, instead of RTS check, I'm going to call it RTS. And then instead of RTS underscore send data, I'm going to call it send data. So yeah, things like that are going to get changed when I get to the real meat and potatoes of this thing. And then here's another one. So yeah, this is the kind of thing I would just, you know, rather than ask the developer to do this, I'll actually do this myself, because it's just describing every change that I want is going to take just as much time as just making the bloody changes. So might as well just make the bloody changes and just do that. So G27, G28. So yeah, some of these actually are correct. Already done the right way. This one, and then again, mode flag. I'm probably going to change that to, like, look at this, all these things that say if mode flag. Oh my God. Well, at least I can do it quickly. Like, I can just say if space mode flag. 122 occurrences of it. And then I'm probably going to change mode flag, so that's lowercase, because uppercase implies it's a class or something like that. Boom. And that's all going to get changed. So yeah, lots of changes coming up here. Let's see, anything else I want to change while we're at it? Looks like another one of these. Boom. There, how long would it have taken me to explain this? Longer than that. And here we have, that's pretty neat, but I see they're both doing similar things. And I see that we also have, this is, you know, I understand the concept of premature optimization. So here we have, if mode flag and pause flag is 0, else, if not, also, I think it's pretty clear if you look at the code that we use the one true brace style, so not using our coding style is kind of inconsiderate. So in each case we have this. Pause flag is 0, pause flag is 1. Also pause flag is probably a bool, or should be a bool. Yeah, it is. So 0 and 1, you know, should just be not pause flag. Open, here's one where it's not pause flag equals 0. What? So therefore it equals 1, right? Pause flag equals 1. Just pause flag, please. And so you got some cases where pause flag is something and other cases where it's not something. So you could say, I'm just going to kind of go through this real quick, and we'll just say if pause flag, then gather together all the ones that have the pause flag. And that becomes else if mode flag. Meanwhile, so that obviously makes no sense. These can't, if this occurs, if not modes flag, and again, pause flag is never set on something else, is it? True, false, that's it. It's true or false. So therefore, you know, what were they hoping for there? I don't know. Oops, I should close all the tabs because it gets out of whack. But yeah, as you can see, if it does this, then it's never going to get to this. So what's the point there? The logic is clearly bad logic. So what's up, guys? What am I missing? Take a quick look at that and just see if there's something I missed. Because it looks like an error on the part of the contributor. Sorry about that. 767. Okay, so it was originally true and false gives you that. Else if true and true are false and true, then do this. Otherwise, if true and true, otherwise if false and true. So let's just go back and see if I missed something here. Did I miss something? True, false, false, true, false, false, true, false. So yeah, it's this one. It's the same bloody thing. I think maybe they meant to not have that not in front. I think that was a mistake. It should have been, I think it's meant to be this. I think that was the mistake. I hate to assume, but I'm gonna assume. It'll be clear in the commit that something that I changed it and I did it wrong. So I think I already got that one right. Nope. So yeah. Oh, and what's up with mode flag? Did I forget to change it? Okay. So yeah, does this seem typical? Right, and here we have another case where it's like, what? This is a case where I would say maybe UI init should just call RTS update instead, and so we should still call UI init. I mean, you've got to call UI init at some point. This also does things like updates initializes the beeper maybe, and the status message and other things. So, but again, it's like, and we always have UI init, I think. So, unless I'm mistaken, yeah, it's always there. So it calls init LCD, which who knows what that'll be, but you can see it checks to see if there's encoder pins. So it'll you know, it'll bypass a lot of stuff that doesn't matter. Like if you're using UHElib I2C, otherwise, then it doesn't update for the buttons, sets the encoder, resets the status. So yeah, things like that. So init LCD is defined here in Marlin UI. So yeah, has display or D1 E3v2. Has display is kind of, it doesn't mean every bloody display, so it's kind of like oops. But it also does mean that if you want, you can define an init LCD, Marlin UI init LCD, wherever you want. And I think if there's one for RTS, like this is where you would typically say, oh, well, here's where I'll do my init. And then has display is defined for all these. And I think Karate RTS might be one of the ones that also defines it, but yeah, I gotta come up with a better name for this, because has display is sort of like, I think it means you can do things to the display, or you can init it and you can call the display. I don't know what it means, but it's definitely become more obsolete over time. So yeah, RTS init. So here's where I would make some tweaks and have still do UI init, but have RTS update be called in UI init instead. So for example, I could do that right now, assuming has, well, I won't do that right now. I'd have to test the build and see that it actually builds. Did they include in the configuration though what it's called? Like, 'cause I don't think it's actually, I don't think they passed a, yeah, they didn't define it anywhere. So it's like, where is it going to be in the configs? Show me that. We need that added somewhere. So yeah, I think overall, yeah, and here's print flag. What's this print flag? Print flag shows up in EC3D UI. Power loss. But yeah, so this is the kind of thing where I might make that part of RTS. And it actually can be equal to 2. So isn't that nice? And it's defined as just an int hanging out by RTS. And yeah, this is the kind of thing where we have these address buffs. This is the kind of thing that changes from display to display and implementation and automatically generated code from automatically generated code, and gets very annoying. But yeah, I think file name nature. It's funny names. Then you got to look for things like misspellings, which there always are. Throw a header on there. All that kind of stuff. So yeah, all those things we have to do kind of ahead of time to get things in place. RTS show, I think I came up with a better name for that, like just RTS. And then RTS send data is just send data. RTS check just becomes RTS, because what are we checking? What's getting checked here? Is that a bad translation of, did they mean something else? And then you have all these, like, this kind of thing where it's like, I don't know. How many of these do we want? That many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, that 10 was nice. Oops. Oops. And 0x is spelled wrong. That's fine. Capital X, lowercase x, whatever. But yeah, this is just makes it a little neater. Like, less scrolling, maybe. And then you got things like this. Maybe. And, you know, we're going to have many more axes possibly, so maybe we'd want to support those extra axes. I don't know. What do you think? In the long run, eventually. But yeah, that's the thing, is there's no consideration for, you know, other machines that might be using your display. It's just for the Soval SV06 and nobody else. If you want to move that display to another machine, good luck. You want to move it on, use it on a CNC, good luck. Anyway, I won't bore you too much with this stuff. But this is the kind of cleanup I'll typically do on something like this. And I know this probably makes it harder to integrate stuff. Like if I change RTS show to RTS everywhere, and then I change RTS check to RTS everywhere, the next time that we want to do integration from some external fork, it's going to become slightly more of a hassle than it would otherwise be. But we got to have standards. And then, you know, RTS send data again. Methods are typically named like this, so And I just want to check one thing. IA Creality is also an RTS, and I did the same kind of thing there, as I recall. Yeah. And yeah, I did remit send data, so. So yeah, this is the kind of cleanup that I would do across the board just to get this more within a standard and somewhat smaller. Fewer bytes to be sent across the world. Although if I want to add lots more documentation into the code, which is always a nice thing to do, I'm willing to sacrifice a few bytes for that. What's this one? Oh, RTS. Oh, send data. Right. So yeah, it'd be nice if the submitters would do this sort of thing, but oh well. You know, I mean, this is the kind of thing where it's fairly obvious that we have standards, and then they should just be followed. And then for someone to just ignore them and not care is kind of weird to me. It's like, I'm such a stickler for these kinds of details that it just weirds me out. Like, why would you, are you a little bit embarrassed about submitting this without doing your diligence, or you're just too busy, changing diapers, time for this sort of thing. I get that. If you got a life, that's one thing. I get it. The printing results, that's very helpful, I guess. Handle end of file reached, true. True. And again, we got standards here. Okay. Print flag. Let's, I don't necessarily want to change all those because there's one that's used somewhere else that I don't want to mix up in here, but let's see. Clean up. So if I submit that first and then do the change, it'll be easier to see. That one doesn't count. That one does. Right. Cool. Yeah, and it's consistent anyway. Look, mode flag, pause flag. It fits. And then there's also start print flag, which is funny. Might as well fix that up too. And yeah, I would tend to want to stick these into, doesn't equal 0. Does equal 0. Oh, it's this one. Typically, we'll just do that kind of thing. And eventually I'll fix up FTD Eve Touch UI as well. I'll leave this alone because it's not related to this PR, but we'll do at least these. And look at all the failure to follow my bloody standards. It's not that hard, guys. Come on. Come on. And same with 4, you know. Is this the best way to do this? I don't know. It's not. I could do a little bit of a but yeah, I understand a lot of this comes from China as well, so it sort of just is what it is. Sometimes the regular expression stuff is sketchy because there might be it might be something at the end of a comment, and you don't necessarily want to do the search and replace on the thing that's at the end of a comment, and yeah, or there's a comment at the end of the line or whatever. So yeah. I mean, I could run a formatter on this, but those aren't usually the best way to do things either. Sometimes they don't always produce the best results, and then I still have to clean it up. So yeah, there's that. But the nice thing about this, you know, I don't necessarily like the brace on their own line thing. It's just one of those things that wastes vertical space, makes it, I don't see as much code at the same time. Right. People don't like ternaries for some reason. I don't know why. They make things sometimes just fine to read. They're not that bad. And look at all this indentations all screwy. And then there's tabs in here. Well, that's probably got something to do with it too. Ugh. Yeah, they've been using 4-space tabs, I can tell. But yeah, that's one of the things that's annoying. You gotta do your indentation in spaces, guys. Come on. Get it straight. So yeah, I can see there's a lot of stuff in here that's just, I don't know, maybe I'm better off doing it with two tabs, 2-space tabs, and just doing it that way. while. Mm-hmm. One-liners, baby. It's kind of a non-pedantic style is what we go for in Marlin. Is just like, if you don't need to have like a lot of like this kind of thing, like if that expression is, you know, supersedes the double ands, so we don't really need this. You do need the or wrapped in parentheses, so that's good. But you don't need that wrapped in parentheses, so. And then you do this kind of thing. And I typically put the ands in front of things like that instead. All right, so we got these things where I find that slightly more readable, frankly. I don't see the difference. If these, typically you might wrap these kinds of things up like that because you don't know if they're going to be what they're going to be, but I trust their simple values in this case. But yeah, this kind of thing is just it's pedantry, you don't need it. I think I dealt with some of these kinds of command things earlier too in the other RTS files, where it's like, well, if you're doing standard commands of a certain kind, you could make these into standardized functions and have them share the functions. But yeah, general cleanup is all I'm doing here. Real basic. There's so much to go through, obviously. Like, look at this, another one of these bloody things. And here again, mode flag. So else. Else. I don't quite get why you squish those together like that. It's not very readable. There's some places where they're like, oh, well, we'll do it really pedantically, and then other places where they're like, well, we'll just do it in the ugliest way possible. Why not? Mm-hmm. Both. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you could spend all day on this. Clean, clean, clean. What's this doing? Nothing. But we'll keep it here anyway for one reason or another. I'm not sure what that's meant to do. Maybe it's just meant to advance IDX to frame index, in which case why not just assign it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got a little shorthand here and there. And you can see like places like where this is being done over and over again. Send data something plus this plus followed by this. Why wouldn't you just have a nice little shorthand where it always passes exchange page address at the end, you know? And then just use that instead of typing this stuff over and over again. Like you're just making more work for yourself. And for me, obviously. Boy, I could do this all day. And I probably will. But yeah, this is the inside scoop, folks. Thanks, Pitas82. Pitass82. I appreciate that. There's a lot to do all the time, every day, so a lot of it goes unnoticed because it's just, you know, I do a release every couple months and there's not much to see in between, except things breaking occasionally and other stuff like mysteriously changing, which doesn't necessarily explain itself. There's going to be cases like this where I'm going to just have to do a search and replace. Every time I find if mode flag do this plus this, I could probably do a search and replace on that with some cleverness. And I'll also, one of the other things I'll do is go through and translate all the Chinese just so we have an English translation of what's being said here. Because I don't know. I'd like to know what the comments are, even though they're probably just somebody's name or something. Who knows? Yeah, I'm gonna probably do something with this mode flag thing. Check filement. Yeah, so here you can see. It's not how it's spelled, guys. You know, at least make that kind of change for me. Would you? Yeah, so I mean, it's just because it works doesn't mean it's good. It's just ugly, man, ugly. And here you don't know that that's not necessarily correct. I actually have a We actually have a standard for that. Like your particular machine might have low as the filament runout, but it doesn't mean everybody does. So what do they intend here? Let's see, change filament. It looks like 0 means out. There, now it'll work on more machines, guys and gals. Yeah, I encourage folks at, like, you know, Crowdy and elsewhere to tune in and see what we go through dealing with their contractor's code, we'll assume. We'll assume it's the contractor's fault. But yeah, try and follow our standards, and that'll help a lot. Just little things like this. Like, all you have to do is just do it right from the beginning, and then we don't have to spend all this time cleaning up your stuff. Which, you know, again, this just holds back the state of the art. You know, I could spend all kinds of time on this. And I could be doing stuff that actually requires, you know, programming skills, which I've been developing over the last several decades, instead of text editing skills, which anybody could do. Like, you should hand this to an intern or something. Or maybe I should hand it to an intern. I don't know. Don't know what to do about this damn thing. It's just a mess. So here, turn on all the fans to high. You sure that's what you want to do? We actually have a way to do this too, which is like, and we don't use necessarily fan count. Instead, we would call thermomanager set fan speed, and you know, and that'll do the right thing with redundant fans and so forth. Like, if I go looking for it, it's the fan number and then the speed. So yeah, so going here, I comma 255. There may be, you know, there's other things it needs to do, so you want to be able to do that right. Right? See, here you did it right. And this actually doesn't turn off all the fans, it just turns off the first fan. You know, maybe you want to say disable fans, or this, is it, forget now, set fan speed to 0, but in thermal manager, temperature H, there it is, fans loop, We got fans loop as well. Scaled fan speed, set fans paused, 0 fan speeds, there we go. What if there's no bed? Gotta do that too, right? This kind of thing. Yeah, consider the other folks that might have, that might use this display. Boy. So yeah, I asked them to send this over because I knew it would need endless cleanup, and as you can see, this is it's what I've signed up for. Again, it's like, really, I would so much rather be using my skills for hard problems in programming rather than cleaning up bad formatting and failure to follow standards. For sure. Current X, and these are also current positions, this kind of thing. It's just .x. Current position Y, same deal. It's just .y. And Z. .z. They haven't been keeping up. It's like they still stuck back in 2017. These things have been changed and updated. We use structures now. We use like better methods now. Come into the future, guys. Come on. I expect to go to Shenzhen and find them still driving Model A's or something. But they're in some ways very futuristic, in other ways very, very much throwback. So yeah, you can see I could spend all day on this stuff, and I will. And here we have, if less than x min, then it equals x min. Well, actually, you can just say no less current position x min, and that takes care of that for you. And then you can say no more. And I know there's an else there, but not necessarily better. And that's interesting. Also, you can kind of do this sort of thing where you say, you're going to divide it by 10 in every case. Well, then we'll just move that to the end. And if this is all going to be floatified anyway, you might as well do your calculation. That way. And then it looks like you could probably just say float the whole thing after you've done all the other stuff. There. How about that? And you can do that just for fun. I do prefer to put an F on things like this just because it means we're not going to use doubles in this case, if that happens to be where you're at. And then again, no less. Y min. There may even be I might even have something to constrain these already. No more. And actually I have constrain. Or is it limit? Limit. Yeah, so limit. You know, or you could say constrain past that and then do all that, but it is what it is. Y min, and then you've got this here again. Also, these are being defined inside of things, so usually you can't get away with that, so it's like you want to wrap it up in. It depends on the standard that you're using, but right, and then you've got the same deal here. And actually, since these are, I would actually say const expr like that. But yeah, these are standards that I apply throughout Marlin all the time. It's very typical paradigm. So it's like, I hope that standards are followed more consistently. Across the board would be nifty. Again, it's just like, I have this pedantry about non-pedantry. Is that a thing? Filament 0 load. That's a nice name. And then singleton lines like that. Can just be like that. Same here. And then what's up with this? There you go. Clean the screen by erasing 20 lines. Looks like. Oof, don't get me started on that. Yep, another one of those. Oof. The thing is, once I get this sort of cleaned up, I can compare it with the other RTS stuff that we have. Like, I wouldn't necessarily be able to do as a comparison as readily if we didn't have this kind of like standardization going on. And I've got nozzle IE, PID. I like to have my breaks indented one indent more, please. And indent's kind of important. I mean, at the very least, they could run a formatter on this code before they submit it, and it would be at least closer to. And we have a standard for that. Actually, there's a. I'm using as my standard. What's it called? Uncrustify, because that's the one that seems to do the best job with what we have with this particular pattern that we use, which is the one true brace standard of indentation and so forth, and then also the indentation of preprocessor defines, which isn't necessarily typical, but it helps for this particular code base. Does a lot of metaprogramming, and so it's like it just makes more sense to include it in the cascade. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's okay. Plus equals 1. Hey, there it's where you just do that. Pre-increment, that's what you mean. Uh-huh. And here we have target -5. I would probably use something like hysteresis, actually. And there's another way we can check this, which is greater than or equal. Yeah, we've got another way to do this, which is actually built into the thermal manager class, or the temperature class. So I would probably use that method. I'll come back to that later, I'm sure. There's no doubt. No doubt I'll come back to that later. Here I'm going to eventually change that to be a macro. And you could also do this kind of thing. If 0 and 1 is the option there, which makes sense, you just say it doesn't equal runout state, and that's 1. Oops. Eventually I'll get it right. Right, so you have this one. If true equals, really? And true equals, come on. Now you're just trying to get on my nerves with that stuff. Yeah, right? I'll come back to that eventually. Then we have another one for like that. singleton, or a single line, as it were. I find that fine, even though that might be, that would kind of annoy some people. I get that. I get it. Clean file name icon. Well, if that's what you're doing there, then you're cleaning all the file name icons, I assume. And here we'd probably use our loop function instead, but what the heck, I'll indent it just because it looks cooler. Let's see, then you got and millis minus stable point time greater than 30. Sometimes I'd wrap that in parentheses. I'm not in the mood. Not in the mood though. Then you've got clean screen. Okay, very good. Memset. We'll just 0 it. How about that? Did you catch any typos of mine yet? I have a feeling this is all going to be fine. The one thing I might add is, well, later I'll add the actual config option. Oi. CD up. It's an interesting one. If the file name doesn't start with a slash, then CD up. I wonder why. If SD detected, then mount it. Okay. Seems like that kind of thing should be handled by our own stuff. And if it's our own stuff has got problems, then they should fix that for us and submit it to the project. Don't make us guess. Do us a favor once in a while. Throw us a bone. If there's a bug in Marlin, please let us know. And don't just keep it to yourselves and patch it inside your LCD code. For Christ's sake, people. Yeah, we got a lot of these things where it's memset 0. Yeah, okay. Just 0 it then. You can see in one case it had the address, in the other case it didn't. Well, with arrays you don't need the address, that's why. But with structures you do take the address. So, but if you put the address in front of the address dereferencer in front of an array, it basically treats it like it wasn't there. It's the same in both cases, so isn't that handy? It's not like the pointer to the array is what you get back or something, because there's no pointer that exists, so to speak. It's just the address of the array. Break. You guys and your breaks, I tell you. Put them in the right place, come on. Break else, well, you don't need the else because you broke. if rect data equals 1, if it equals 2, if it equals 3. That's almost a place where I'd want to use a switch if it's 4. And then again, what is this mystery value? Like these should be enumerated. Rect data equals 1, equals 2, equals 3, equals f1. What does that even mean? You know, give me some enumerated constants that explain, that define those instead of using mystery meat values. It's not cool. It's bad practice. You know, you can't come to me and complain that Marlin isn't following standards, or it's falling behind, or it's taking too long to get it updated when you're not even following the standards yourself. Again, this stuff does take us a while. It holds us back. Right, and you could almost say mode flag plus the difference between those. The compiler will do some smart stuff in these cases, but the thing is, these just make the code longer and harder to read. Ultimately, if mode flags send data, otherwise send data. Like, you're sending data in both cases, just change the value you're sending, for Christ's sake. For Christ's sake. Do I have to do this in my own case? Let's do it. Let's do it. So I'm going to be searching for if mode flag. First of all, we're going to be searching for some number of spaces, and then if mode flag with those escaped, and then that's going to be escaped, and that's going to be escaped, and then you're going to have some number of spaces, and you're going to have some number, and that's going to be captured, and then you're going to have some number of spaces, followed by that, and then some number of spaces, and then some number of spaces, and some number of spaces. Now all we really need is, and then that's going to be there, and then that's going to be the other number that we're capturing, and then boom, then we're going to have a return. That's going to be that. So what we really want is, I need this number of spaces, or yeah, just give me this number of spaces. Okay, then we're going to have that be replaced by send data, exchange place plus, oh wait, first we're going to have the spaces, followed by mode flag. It's going to have that, and it's going to have the second thing, and the third thing, and then that. So I think that'll do it. We'll do a couple test runs and see what it looks like. Well, let's see. First of all, let's put in what I cleaned up so far. And let's see what we get. Nope, it's not finding it. So why not? If mode flag, do I need to escape this too? Maybe. Can't hurt. Nope. What am I missing? Send data, exchange page base plus. Oh, yeah, plus is a special character, I forgot. There we go. And then if I do a single replace, looks good to me. Let's see what that looks like. Hey, it's like magic. I think I put in just enough spaces though, is that right? Oops, look, it missed something, so let's undo. Let's try again. See, in that case, it seemed to work, but I think what I forgot was, yeah, I forgot to put in the return character. There we go. See if that worked better. Oh yeah, that's much better. All right, regular expression's awesome. So yeah, I could carry on with this for a while. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, look, I missed one. I wonder what happened there. Has it got a tab in it or something? No. Mode flag. Oh, you know what it might be? Let's see. No, it looks right to me. If mode flag, then some stuff. What's missing? Oh, it's got RTS in front of it, that's why. Well, if this is part of RTS, then it doesn't need the RTS. That's one of the things that sometimes gets missed. But it may be that it's not within an RTS method. Ugh, gosh, come on. Yeah, it is part of RTS, I think, so. Here, of course, it doesn't have it, so let's see. Oops. TS dot, there we go. Now I just got to remember what lines. What was the line? I've got a plugin that actually will show me like the header of the function at the top and let me jump there. So yeah, if it's within there, between 546 and 1726, I don't need the RTS. So it doesn't need it there. Doesn't need it there. Doesn't need it here. So, oh wait, is that 17? Yeah, after 17. What was the number again? Yeah, here it does need it, so. Here probably. Here it does. Here it does. Here. Yeah, okay, that takes care of all that. Cool. And now here we've got an interesting one. Plus axis unit mode -1. I don't know how many times that shows up, but little exceptions. I don't mind typing manually. Can't regular expression everything. But let's see if they've got any more of these. Ah, well, there we've got an interesting one where it's like change page number equals 1 for that or 56 for that. And then you just use plus that number and then you're done. What else you got for me? There's another one that somehow got missed. Oh, it already has the parentheses taken out, that's why. So yeah, if I have this with no parentheses, and again, does that need the RTS? It does. Good. Good. And here, I would almost do, well actually it's doing this in both cases, so. And so yeah, some of these are, oh, here's one where it's pause. Oof. Let's just get rid of that right away. And here's one where the RTS mode has all that. So yeah, paused CPP has a lot of these. What's this one? Oh yeah, that was just my work. That was just my work area. Okay. What a mess. All right, next. Right. So there's one where I could say not pose flag, not pause flag. Then you're going to be doing this. And then you're going to be doing this. 11 versus 66. Else, $12.67, so yeah, makes sense. And just quickly check and see, does it look okay to me? It does. Sure. And yeah, once you get started, it's hard to, it's kind of hard to stop. It's true. Well, they got some ideas right. So, can't complain. I mean, overall, you know, these things are generally not terrible. It's just little niggling issues that can be really annoying to deal with sometimes. Each moment update, yeah, like there's these, and these standards they follow, you know. Or 76, then break. Clean screen, clean file name, clean icon. Memset. And if, what does that go with? Check filament. And again, they misspelled filament. Filament. Oh, really? Let's see. And yeah. Not too bad, not too bad. So yeah, the state of open source firmware development, as you can see, is alive and well. It was funny, I posted a, you know, meme, a typical meme type thing over on, where was it? Twitter. Just making a joke about how the community is like very focused on, you know, Clipper and not paying as much attention to Marlin anymore. You know the meme, and then of course, you know, part of it was just to like see which Clipper bros decided to speak up and say something, and that was funny because yeah, of course they popped up. Of course they popped up. And we're like, you know, giving me crap or whatever. Well, if Marlin just had this, I wouldn't, you know, blah, blah, blah. I think one of it was, you need a macro language. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, where's your submission of a macro language then? What are you waiting for? Send over the old macro language guy, or at least, you know, the standard that you're looking for. Send that on over. I'll be happy to incorporate it, you know, if you've got some ideas about that. It's an open source project. That's the whole point. Yeah. Silly keyboard. And you know how it is. You know how it is dealing with community sometimes. Or, you know, communal people. PIDP, yeah, those are all floats. It's just a lot of folks who just don't have consideration for, or, you know, quite understand where things are coming from. You know, we have a paradigm, and it's not a bad paradigm. You know, ultimately, the idea is that, you know, we definitely want Marlin to fit on, even today, small AVR boards as much as possible, you know, without having to sacrifice too much. And yeah, we've got a different paradigm. It runs on a single board, you know, and so while a macro language is certainly possible for your 32-bit boards, and if people want to submit that, that's a great idea. If it's, you know, if it's good, if it actually is a reasonable proposal, I would never just kick it out or reject it. But there'll be a lot of, you know, sometimes there's too much pushback from people who don't do a lot of coding, or who assume that I might push back on it, and I don't always want to push back on things. You know, from day to day, my mood may be different about what I'm willing to bring into the fold. And consider minus, I don't know if that matters there. And apparently it's a 32-bit value, so why does it need to check float in that case? Divided by 100, it looks like it's doing that in both cases, huh? Therefore, look, within. It actually is using within, and you don't need to put parentheses around a variable. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. So yeah, if greater than, then subtract that. Otherwise, you know, give me that, and then divide by 100. And if that turns out to not work quite right for one reason or another, we'll look into it, but I think it'll be fine. Then you got current. That's interesting. And these are all the same. I don't know if you noticed, but they are the same. Therefore, if it's all the same to me, oh wait, no, they are X, Y, and Z, aren't they? So close. But yeah, this is the kind of thing I think I can consolidate a bit. I've got some string reforms coming up as well, which is pretty exciting. And here, this is sending that both times. Ah, 66, I recognize that one. So yeah, I'm gonna get some food shortly because I'm hungry. But yeah, it's been good to hang out with you guys today and do a little bit of geeking out with you. I'm having fun. And yeah, we'll carry on with this kind of cleanup. There's so much more to do with, you know, every given day. This is just part of the process that you have to go through with any given, you know, submission. So I know it's pretty boring. I don't expect anyone to like come back and like sit through this stuff. And cue now. Some of these things I don't know if I'll follow the same practices. Q now definitely relies on the buffer being somewhat empty, and there's no guarantee there's room if you're in the middle of a print, so I gotta check and see if those are all okay. But yeah, as I review this stuff, I'm looking at the code as well a little bit, getting some idea of what needs to be done. But in general, is the max feed rate always that? Yeah, it is, I guess. Can't do it. How about this one? Yeah, same deal. What about max jerk? This one works. Axis steps per millimeter. Nope. Apparently not. Yep, that's one of those ones that is an array. I'm probably going to do something about that, though. I'd like to be able to use an array or the other form. And you just have to make more complex data structures, that's all. But there's been a reason for that, which is that sometimes we have values for E and sometimes we don't. Like for each extruder, and sometimes we have values that are shared with one extruder. But clearly there's ways I can work around that. Like if you take parentheses and it's past the extruders, it's like you would just go and use the value, you know, that it can use, and the compiler will automatically do all the right things. So yeah, that's something I need to reform as well. One of those things. But sounds like my neighbor's having a little phone conference outside. That's cool. But yeah, we got through most of this, and I think that's a good cleanup. But this is for the Soval SVO6. So again, I don't want to necessarily have a separate pile of code for each RTS display, but one of the things we may end up doing is just having a separate set of RTSs for a little while until we work out, you know, the best way to mash them all up together. But yeah, we'll get there. Equals 0. What's this one? It's either 0 or 1, and apparently it should just be a bool. Bothy. And enabled. There aren't any more of those. Fill run out pin equals 1. Doesn't equal fill run out state. And I think in general, we have a whole different way of dealing with filament runout, so it's like just checking the state of the pin is not enough. We need to actually check the filament runout state handler and ask it if it ran out. I think it's ran out. Run out, filament ran out. Right? So that's the way I would typically do it. Instead of looking at this. We'll say, run out, filament ran out. And I forget if it takes parentheses or not. Let's see if that's the case. Whoops. Yeah, so that's that. And then we have also not filament ran out. Yeah, because it could be a filament runout wheel, it could be, checking for motion in the filament. There's so many ways we do that. And then here's again another one of these things where it's like always doing that. And it's 11 versus 66, yeah. Any more of those? Oh, of course. Did I get that right? Oh, wait, time versus time 1. Oops. Let's do that right. I should check that in other places too. Same kind of thing here, weight versus weight. Well, that one's the same. That one's 40 versus 95. Oops. Same deal. $32.87. Oops, that's different. Subtract 8 in each case, apparently. Right. 3287 again. $40.95. $40.95. It's nice to replace a bunch of things with two lines. $40.95. $40.95. Okay, good. $32.87. Oh, that's got to be wrong. Make sure I didn't do too many of those. Nope, just this one. Did you see that when I did it? Try to warn me. Let's see, here we have change page numbers 56 versus, yep, gotcha. Time. Let's make sure I didn't get that wrong and pause. Like that's probably, my guess is 1267 time VP. Yeah, I think maybe that one was different. Let's check pause, CPP. That was the one I was thinking I probably missed and got wrong. Line 720 win was, yeah, time 1 when it was mode and not pause flag. So we had 11 and then, yeah, so. Let me double check that. Let's see. Mode flag versus not mode flag. But pause flag the same in both cases. So I think that's actually correct when it's not pause flag. So I could just say if pause flag, do this, else. And we'll just do it that way. Prefer the positive over the negative in the first place, although you should use the one that falls through the most often, I suppose. But when you have an else, it ends up branching in either case, so. Boom. Anything else that I want to do right now? Meh. Eat food is what I want to do right now. I've got burrito ingredients and other things that I should use up, so it's probably where I'll go. Just make myself a little burrito. Yeah, I gotta always remember to do the search for trailing spaces. In fact, I should probably just run a check at the beginning, as part of the standard checks, and just have it include that as one of the standard checks, and then reject it if it doesn't do if it has trailing spaces. You lose. Good day, sir. Yeah, so I'll go over this a bit in my copious spare time and make sure everything is good in the long run. But this is less obtrusive than the last, well, it's got all this, but generally speaking, it's less obtrusive than the Ender 5 S1, which is good. I think mostly it's handling its own things for the most part, it seems like. But yeah, that's a good cleanup start out for a cleanup. I'm pretty happy with that. So this pin migration is going to be real fun. To the LCD. So much going on with this. It's going to be great. Just you wait. But yeah, getting a lot of feedback on this, which is good. VCC versus ground. I don't know. Most ramps have 5 volts there, but yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm kind of thinking of doing making things that are ramps like and separating them from ramps, because it's not always. But VCC as opposed to 5 volts. Sometimes I like to say 5 volts rather, but clearly this needs some cleanup. Some conflicts have arisen since changes have been made recently. Always a danger with pull requests that hang around for a while. All right. So yeah, we'll see you soon, guys. Thanks for stopping by.